Section 1. The World Behind the World. An Introduction to Spooner Street. Close your eyes for a moment. Not yet, not all the way. Just let them soften. Let the light go a little dim. Let the muscles around them unknot, just the tiniest bit, and let yourself settle into wherever you are right now. Your bed, your couch, the quiet of your room, or maybe the hum of the world just outside your window. It doesn't matter where you are. What matters is that you're here and you're comfortable and you've got time. Because tonight, we're going somewhere familiar. We're going to a street you've probably visited hundreds of times without ever really thinking too hard about what's underneath it. A street full of neighbors who've been neighbors for over 2 decades. A street where a man once fought a giant chicken for several city blocks and somehow walked back to his front door in time for dinner. A street where a baby plotted world domination between juice boxes and afternoon naps. A street that, the more you look at it, starts to feel less like a normal place and more like somewhere designed deliberately, carefully, almost architecturally, to contain something much stranger than a Sunday night animated comedy. That street is Spooner Street. That family is the Griffins. And tonight, we're going to take it all apart, slowly, gently, piece by piece. Every theory, every thread, every quiet detail that fans have been pulling at for more than 2 decades. This is not going to be rushed. Nothing tonight is going to be rushed. This is the kind of conversation you have late at night, lying in the dark, voice low, the way ideas always seem bigger and more interesting and somehow more true in those slow hours before sleep. We're going to let each theory breathe. We're going to sit with the strange implications. We're going to follow the threads wherever they go, and if some of them lead somewhere a little uncomfortable or a little sad or a little beautiful, we'll follow them there too. So settle in. Let's start at the beginning. Every piece of mythology needs a geography. Every story needs a place where it lives. And for more than 20 years, that place has been a neighborhood on the coast of Rhode Island, a fictional town whose name we'll set aside for tonight, because names are limiting things, and the place we're talking about is bigger than any name. We'll just call it the town. We'll call it Spooner Street. We'll call it home. Home, in this case, is a 2-story house. White, a little worn, a little lopsided in the way that animated homes tend to be, as if the gravity works slightly differently there than it does here. There's a front yard. There's a kitchen with a yellow quality to the light. There's a living room with a dog-eared couch, and a television that has been on, one imagines, since roughly 1999. There's a baby's room with an unusually clean crib and blueprints underneath the mattress and a doomsday device behind the changing table. And there's a family, a man named Peter, a woman named Lois, a son named Chris, a daughter named Meg, a dog named Brian, and a baby named Stewie. You know them. You've known them for years. You've laughed at them, cringed with them, watched them lose things and regain them and lose them again in the way that only happens in stories where the ending always, somehow, resets. You know their rhythms. You know their jokes. You know the shape of them. But here's the thing about shapes. The longer you stare at a shape, the stranger it starts to look. The human mind, this extraordinary, restless, pattern-hungry thing, cannot look at a story for 25 years without starting to ask questions that weren't necessarily in the script. It sees the details that don't quite add up. It notices the corners that don't quite fit. And then it starts to build. It starts to build theories. Now, theories are a particular kind of thinking. They sit somewhere between evidence and imagination. They're not quite facts because facts don't require the leap, and they're not quite fiction because fiction doesn't insist on the evidence. Theories live in the middle. They say, look at this thing, and now look at this other thing, and now look at the space between them, and ask yourself what lives there. Fan theories, specifically, the kind that grow up around long-running shows, around animated families and talking animals and babies who can inexplicably pilot time machines, are something even more particular than that. They are acts of love in a strange way. They are what happens when a show means enough to someone that they want to understand it more deeply than the writers perhaps intended. They are the sign of an audience that has paid such close and devoted attention that they've started to see things. And the things they've seen, in this case, are extraordinary. Some of the theories we'll talk about tonight are funny, clever little observations that reframe a joke or a throwaway line in an unexpected way. Some of them are genuinely unsettling, the kind that make you look at a familiar face and see something different there. Some of them are melancholy, some of them are, in their own strange way, beautiful. And a few of them, a very small, very specific few, are things that the show itself seems to have intended, woven into the fabric of the episodes so carefully that it's hard to believe they were accidents. We'll take our time with all of them. We're in no hurry. Let's start with the most fundamental question, the one that underpins everything else. What kind of world is Spooner Street? On the surface, the answer seems obvious. It's a comedic animated world, a heightened version of American suburban life, a place where the rules of reality are loosened in service of the joke. Dogs talk, babies have English accents and functional intelligence beyond their years. A man can fall off a building and walk away. A death in one episode is unremarked upon by the next. But here's where the theorists start to get interested. Because that looseness, that particular quality of a world where consequences don't quite stick, where the same people keep surviving the unsurvivable, where memory is selectively applied, where certain things are impossible and yet keep happening anyway, that looseness has a shape to it. And shapes mean something. What if the world of Spooner Street isn't just a comedic exaggeration of our own? What if it's something more deliberate than that? What if the reason the rules don't quite apply, the reason death is negotiable and logic is optional, and certain characters seem to exist slightly outside the normal parameters of cause and effect, is because the world itself was built that way? Built by someone or for someone with a specific purpose in mind? This is the central question that runs beneath almost every major theory we'll talk about tonight. Not what happened in this episode, but what is this world? Not why did this character do this thing, but what is this character, really, underneath the show's bright colors and its laugh track? The first thing you should know before we go any deeper is that nothing in this story is quite what it seems. Not the family at the center of it, not the street they live on. Not the town around them with its bars and its churches and its TV station and its airport and its inexplicably functioning civic infrastructure for a city that seems perpetually on the edge of some kind of catastrophe. Not even the show itself. Because the show is not just a show. It is, in at least one serious reading, a philosophical text about the nature of storytelling, about the relationship between creator and creation, about what it means to live in a world that was made for you rather than by you. It is, in another reading, a long and detailed account of one man's grief. In another, it's a record of a simulation. In another still, it's a waiting room. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's just breathe for a moment. Let the warmth of wherever you are settle around you. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands uncurl. Let the breath come slow and even, in through the nose, out through the mouth, easy and quiet and unhurried. We have all night, and the first theory, the one that opens the door to everything else, starts with a baby. It always starts with Stewie. If you're enjoying this so far, if you're settling in and feeling that good, slow drift, do me a small favor before we go any deeper. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Your city, your bed, your couch at 2 in the morning. I love knowing where these stories find you. And if you want more nights like this, more theories, more slow burn storytelling, make sure you're subscribed. There's a lot more coming, and I promise none of it will rush you. All right, let's keep going. Section 2. Stewie Griffin and the Architecture of Existence. There is an episode, Season 9, Episode 16, in which Stewie Griffin, standing in a white void, holding a remote control that should not exist, presses a button and creates the universe. Not a universe. The universe, the one we live in, presumably. The one with the Big Bang at its beginning, and the long, slow expansion of everything after it, and the pale blue dot, and the 7 continents, and the Rhode Island coast, and eventually a particular house on a particular street, and a particular family, and a particular baby sitting in his crib, looking out at the world he made. The show plays this as a joke. Most things in the show get played as a joke. But the structure of the joke is interesting because the joke requires you to accept something enormous. that the infant in the striped red onesie is, in some meaningful and possibly literal sense, the first cause. The origin, the thing that was there before anything else was there. Let's sit with that. If Stewie pressed the button, if that moment is canon, which it is, as clearly as anything in this show can be called canon, then everything that follows is his creation. The universe in which he exists is the universe he made. The family he was born into is a family that lives inside his own handiwork. The planet on which his house stands is a planet that he, in some previous iteration of himself, brought into being. This is not a small detail. This is, if you follow it to its logical end, the most radical possible statement a show can make about one of its characters. He is not a character in a story. He is the author of the story. He is, in the deepest theological sense of the term, a creator god. And the theories that grow from this single canonical moment are some of the richest and strangest in the entire Family Guy mythology. Let's start with the most immediately obvious one. If Stewie created the universe, and if Stewie exists within that universe, then Stewie created himself. Or at least he created the conditions under which he could come to exist. This is already philosophically vertiginous, the idea of a being who is both the cause and the effect of its own existence. But the show goes further. In another episode, Stewie travels back in time to Renaissance Italy and meets a young man with an uncommonly brilliant mind and an intense interest in invention and design. That young man is Leonardo da Vinci. And the implication, played lightly, almost as an aside, is that Stewie is Leonardo da Vinci's ancestor, which means that Leonardo da Vinci is Stewie's ancestor, which means that Stewie is descended from himself. Again, the show plays this as a joke, but consider what it actually describes. A being who has, through time travel, inserted himself into his own family tree, who exists simultaneously as origin and descendant, who is his own great something, looping back through the generations to his own beginning, a closed circle of causality with no external starting point. This is not just a clever narrative trick. This is a description of something genuinely extraordinary. A being who is, in a very precise sense, self-created, who owes his existence to no one but himself, who is, in the philosophical vocabulary that would apply here, uncaused, eternal, necessary, in other words, divine. But Stewie is not presented as divine, he's presented as a baby. He lies in a crib, he drinks formula, he has tantrums. He wants things, wants them badly, urgently, the way children want things, with the full force of their being. And he doesn't always get them. He's frustrated, he's lonely, he's clever in a way that the people around him don't understand or appreciate. He performs a version of himself, the world domination, the laser guns, the dramatic monologues, that functions as armor, as distance, as a way of not having to be vulnerable. And this is where the theory gets interesting. Because if Stewie is a creator god, if he literally brought the universe into existence, then his life inside that universe is not the life of a god. It's the life of a child who is enormously capable and profoundly isolated. A child who built a world and then forgot, on some level, that he built it, and who now lives inside it like anyone else, subject to its rules, hungry for the same things everyone else is hungry for: connection, recognition, love. There's a reading of Stewie Griffin, a serious reading, a reading that the show occasionally seems to support, in which the entire character is a portrait of what happens when a being of extraordinary power and intelligence is trapped in circumstances that cannot match him. He is too big for the space he's in. He is always performing, always constructing elaborate plans and speeches and devices, not because he actually intends to take over the world, but because the performance is the only way he knows how to take up space, the only way he knows how to matter. And the one thing that seems to break through the performance, the one thing that reaches the actual Stewie underneath the armor, is Brian. The relationship between Stewie and Brian is one of the most discussed and analyzed relationships in the entire show, and for good reason. It is, by almost any measure, the emotional center of the series. It is the relationship that gets the most honest writing, the most unguarded moments, the most genuine weight. And in the context of the creator-god theory, it becomes something even more interesting than just a good TV friendship. If Stewie is the god of this world, then Brian is what exactly? Brian is a dog. Brian is a dog who speaks English, who drinks martinis, who writes novels that no one publishes, and has opinions on literature that no one around him can fully engage with. Brian is, in his own way, as displaced as Stewie, as out of place, as too much for the room. Some theorists have suggested that Brian's unusual qualities, the intelligence, the self-awareness, the particular quality of his loneliness, are not accidental, that they were designed, that the world's creator, the baby in the crib with the blueprint for the universe, put Brian there on purpose, built him to be exactly the kind of companion that a genius trapped in an infant's body would need. Someone who could meet him, at least partially, where he actually is. This is a theory we'll explore in much more detail in a later section, because Brian's origins are their own rabbit hole, and they go deeper than most people realize. But for now, the important thing is just to hold this image. A god who built a universe and then put himself inside it. And then, perhaps out of loneliness, perhaps out of something even more fundamental than loneliness, built one creature to be with him in it. Let's move on to another branch of the Stewie tree because there are many. One of the most compelling things about Stewie as a character is that he is, even within the logic of the show, temporally unstable. He travels in time. He does it frequently, casually, the way other characters drive to the shops. He has visited the past, the future, and at least several parallel versions of the present. He has, on multiple occasions, met other versions of himself, older, younger, differently formed, differently resolved. And the theory that grows from this temporal instability is one of the most elegant in the whole Stewie canon, that Stewie is not, in any conventional sense, a child. He is ancient. He has been alive in various iterations and configurations for longer than the universe he created. He remembers things that haven't happened yet in the timeline we're watching. He knows things that no infant, however precocious, could possibly know. Things about history, about physics, about the architecture of time itself, because he was there. He was there for all of it. The infant body is a new chapter in a very long story. The particular Stewie we watch, the one in the onesie with the football-shaped head, is just the most recent iteration of a consciousness that has been cycling through existence since before existence had a name. This would explain, by the way, why Stewie's emotional development doesn't track the way a real infant's would. He doesn't grow in the ways we'd expect. He doesn't learn things in the order you'd learn them if you were actually starting from zero. He already knows too much. He has too much of a history. His frustration, his impatience, his particular relationship with boredom, these are not the frustrations of a baby. They are the frustrations of someone who has been waiting, in one form or another, for a very long time. There's another theory, quieter than the others, but in some ways the most haunting, about what Stewie's performance actually cost him. The world domination schemes, the death rays, the ongoing project of threatening to destroy Lois. All of this, in the fan community, has been read not as genuine villainy, but as theater. Stewie doesn't actually want to take over the world. He doesn't actually want to eliminate his mother. The plans are too elaborate, the window for success too repeatedly missed, the pattern too consistent across seasons. If he actually wanted these things with the intelligence and the resources he demonstrably possesses, he could have them. Which means he doesn't want them. Which means the performance is the point. The performance is, on this reading, a way of being interesting, a way of commanding attention, a way of staying in a particular kind of relationship with the people around him, engaged, adversarial, necessary, without having to be vulnerable, without having to ask directly for the thing he actually needs, which is, of course, to be seen, to be known, to be loved, not despite his extraordinary nature, but because of it, and maybe also just because he is himself on the days when himself isn't extraordinary at all, just alone and small and tired. And in at least some of the later seasons, in the episodes that take the Stewie and Brian friendship seriously, that let the two of them be honest with each other in ways they can't be honest with anyone else, you can see that need surface. Very briefly, very quietly, like something coming up for air. The final Stewie theory for this section is one that connects all the others and gives the whole mythology its deepest shape. It is this. Stewie Griffin created the universe. He created himself as his own ancestor. He has lived in various forms for an incomprehensible amount of time. He put himself inside the world he made in the body of a child on a street in a fictional town. And he built one companion to be with him there. Why? The theory says, because he wanted to know what it felt like to not be a god. He wanted to experience limitation. He wanted to feel the smallness and the warmth and the ordinary dailiness of a life that doesn't extend in all directions through time. He wanted a mother who was exasperating, and a father who was baffling, and a sibling he couldn't control, and a dog who was trying very hard to be more than he was. He wanted a family, not the power, not the legacy, not the empire, just the small, warm, difficult, irreplaceable thing that he'd been creating and recreating across the centuries without ever quite managing to build for himself. He put himself in a crib on Spooner Street because it was the only place in the universe he could be just Stewie. And every now and then, in the quiet moments, in the episodes that forget to be funny for a minute, you can see him. Just Stewie. Just a person inside his own creation, trying to figure out what to do with the life he made. Section 3. Brian Griffin. The CIA experiment and the dog who was never a dog. There's a running observation in the Family Guy fan community that Brian Griffin is not a dog. It's framed as a joke. But the more seriously you take it, the more carefully you look at the evidence, the less it feels like a joke, and the more it feels like a hypothesis that the show itself keeps nudging you toward. Brian Griffin drinks martinis. He has read Faulkner. He has opinions, not just preferences, genuine, formed, defensible opinions about literature and politics and the nature of consciousness. He is a failed novelist, which means he is a novelist, which means he is someone who believes he has something to say that is worth the sustained effort of a book. He drives a car. He has dated women, human women, and the relationships have failed, not because of interspecies incompatibility, but for the same reasons human relationships fail. Communication, commitment, the slow erosion of illusion. He is, in almost every observable respect, a person. But he lives in a dog's body. He has dog instincts, the chasing cars, the eating garbage, the losing the thread entirely when a squirrel appears, and he is humiliated by them. He finds them embarrassing. He is someone trapped, on a fairly regular basis, by the body he inhabits doing things the mind above it would not choose. This gap between the mind and the body, between what Brian is and what Brian appears to be, is the gap that the most compelling Brian theories live in. The primary theory, the one with the most detailed evidence base and the most interesting implications, goes like this. Brian is not a naturally occurring talking dog. He is a scientific experiment. Specifically, and most specifically according to a theory that draws heavy support from the shared McFarlane universe, he is a CIA cognitive enhancement experiment, a project designed to test whether human consciousness, or something very close to it, could be transplanted or cultivated in a non-human biological substrate. This theory has a structural precedent that is too precise to be accidental. In American Dad, another Seth MacFarlane show, set in a world that shares significant geographical and institutional DNA with the world of Spooner Street, there is a character named Klaus. Klaus is a German man's consciousness trapped in a goldfish's body after a CIA experiment went wrong. He lives in a bowl in the Smith family's kitchen. He has opinions, memories, desires, and a past. He is, in the most essential sense, human, just housed in the wrong container. Now, is it possible that the CIA in the American Dad universe and the CIA in the Family Guy universe are the same CIA? Given that these shows share a creator, share a network, have crossed over explicitly more than once, and exist in what many theorists consider to be the same fictional reality, yes. More than possible. Almost certain. And if the same CIA that put Klaus in a fish also ran a program designed to test whether human intelligence could be engineered into other animals, then Brian Griffin is not an anomaly. He's not a lucky accident of nature, a dog who happened to develop language and literary ambitions. He's a product a very specific, very deliberate product of a government program that was trying to answer a question about the nature of mind. The implications of this theory are considerable. First, it would explain why Brian is the only dog in the show who is like this. We see other dogs. They behave like dogs. They don't read. They don't drive. They don't publish short stories. If talking dogs were a natural phenomenon in this world, we'd see more of them. But we don't. Brian is unique, and uniqueness in a world as populated and varied as this one usually means design. Second, it would explain the particular flavor of Brian's loneliness. He is not lonely in the way someone is lonely when they haven't found their people yet. He is lonely in the way someone is lonely when they know, with certainty, that there is no category for them. He is a human intelligence in a dog's body, which means he is never fully at home in the human world, where he is, after all, technically a pet, and also never fully at home in the dog world, which he finds instinctive and undignified and impossible to resist. He belongs nowhere. And the CIA program, if it exists, would have known this, would have built this in, perhaps. A mind sophisticated enough to function at human level, but housed in a body that ensures it can never fully access human society. A thing that is close enough to human to be useful as a study subject, but categorically distinct enough to be disposable. This is a bleak theory, but it's a theory that maps onto Brian's arc with uncomfortable precision. Let's talk about Brian's alcoholism, because it matters more than it might seem. Brian drinks. He drinks a lot, and he drinks with a particular kind of fervency that is different from the show's general comedic relationship with alcohol. Other characters drink as a kind of character texture. It's funny, it's exaggerated, it's the show using substance as comedy fodder. Brian's drinking has a different quality. There are episodes where it stops being funny and starts being something else. Something that looks more like self-medication. Something that looks more like someone trying to dull a specific, persistent, very real pain. If Brian is the product of a cognitive enhancement experiment, if his human-level intelligence was engineered rather than natural, then his alcoholism might be understood not just psychologically, but biologically. Dog neurology is not built to support the kind of cognitive load that Brian carries. The self-awareness, the abstract reasoning, the emotional complexity, these are things that a dog's brain was not designed to process. The experiment gave him the software, but kept the hardware. The drinking might be the result of that mismatch. A kind of self-administered correction for a system that is perpetually running too hot, processing too much, overwhelmed by its own capacity in a body that was never meant to contain it. This would also explain, and this is one of the more quietly devastating applications of the theory, why Brian gets worse over time. His intelligence doesn't track upward across the seasons the way you'd expect from someone who reads and thinks and engages with ideas constantly. If anything, the reverse. He gets less reliable, more self-destructive, more prone to exactly the kinds of failures that embarrass him most. Not because the writing got lazy, though some would argue that too, but because the experiment is degrading. The human consciousness engineered into the dog's brain is losing coherence over time, the way all things lose coherence when they're running in an environment they weren't designed for, and he is drinking faster and faster to manage the noise. This brings us to the most dramatic single event in Brian's storyline, and one of the most theorized moments in the entire show: his death. In Season 12, Episode 6, Brian Griffin was killed. Hit by a car. Died on the sidewalk in front of the house on Spooner Street, with his family around him telling them it was okay. The show did not treat this as a joke. It treated it with genuine weight, genuine grief, genuine ceremony. The family buried him. They got a new dog, a replacement who didn't replace anything, because replacements never do. And then 4 episodes later, Stewie used his time machine to travel back and prevent Brian's death, restoring him to the timeline. The fan community's reaction to this arc was intense and complicated, and the theories it generated are some of the richest in the show's history. The most widely discussed reading goes like this: Brian was not killed by accident, or rather, he He was killed by accident in the way that things the universe has scheduled are accidents. The car was not random. Brian's time in the experiment was up. Whatever the program had designed him for, whatever purpose had been embedded in his engineered consciousness, had reached its conclusion. And the universe, or the thing that manages the universe's endings, had scheduled his exit. The reason Stewie's intervention worked, the reason time travel was able to reverse a death that should have been permanent, is because Stewie is not subject to the universe's scheduling. We've established why. He made the universe. He doesn't take orders from it. When Stewie went back and saved Brian, he was not just saving a friend. He was overriding a termination order. He was refusing, on behalf of the person he cared about most, to let the program end. Let's talk about what Brian means to Stewie, what he really means in the context of all the theories we've been building. Stewie is an ancient, self-created consciousness trapped in an infant's body, living in a world of his own design, surrounded by people who cannot understand him or meet him at his level. Brian is an engineered human intelligence trapped in a dog's body, living in a world that has no category for him, surrounded by people who see him as a pet. They are, structurally, the same problem. Two beings of exceptional nature housed in containers that diminish them, circling each other in a world that doesn't quite fit either of them. And they found each other. They found each other on a street in a fictional Rhode Island town, and they built a friendship that is, by the show's own repeated admission, the most important relationship either of them has. The road trips, the adventures, the quiet evenings with a drink and a book and a conversation that doesn't have to perform or pretend, the moments where Stewie drops the evil genius act and Brian drops the literary sophisticate act, and they are just two entities who happen to understand each other in a world where that is rarer than it should be. If Stewie put Brian in this world on purpose, and the creator God theory says he did, then this was why. Not a weapon, not a subject, not a tool, a companion. Someone to be with in the universe that he built. Someone to save when the universe tried to take him back. One more thread in Brian's story before we move on, because it leads somewhere unexpected. Brian's novel. The one he spends years writing. The one he carries the manuscript of through various disasters and indignities. The one that does not, by all accounts, find an audience. What is it about? We never quite find out. The show is coy about the actual content. But one theory holds that Brian's novel, the sustained, earnest, deeply personal creative project of this engineered consciousness, is about what he knows most intimately. His own strangeness, his own displacement, the experience of being inside a wrong body, in a world that sees only the surface of you, which would make the novel, in a very real sense, a record of the experiment. An account, written from the inside of what it is to be Brian Griffin, to be the thing the program made, trying to understand itself, trying to find language for an experience that has no precedent. The novel doesn't get published. No one reads it. But he keeps writing it. Because that's what you do when the thing you are is something no one else has a name for. You write it down. You make a record. You say, I was here and I was this, and even if no one reads it, it happened. Even if no one reads it, it happened. Section 4. Peter Griffin. The heightened reality and the world inside his head. Peter Griffin is the kind of man that comedies have always loved. He is large, he is wabot, he is catastrophically poor at navigating the gap between what he wants to do and what he should do. He breaks things. He misses the point. He stumbles into disasters and stumbles back out of them. He is, by almost any objective measure, not a person who should be allowed to pilot the machinery of daily life without supervision. And yet the world around him bends to accommodate him. The chaos he creates resolves. The things he destroys come back. The consequences that should follow from his actions are regularly suspended or canceled or simply ignored. He gets away with it over and over in a way that, if you step back from the comedy long enough to ask the structural question, should not be possible. Why does Peter Griffin keep surviving? Why does the world keep forgiving him? Why does everything eventually sort itself out around him? There are two major theories. They point in different directions, but they both start from the same observation. This man should not still be here. The first theory is called the heightened reality hypothesis, and it is the more optimistic of the two. The heightened reality hypothesis says that the world of Spooner Street is not a normal world, even by the relaxed standards of animated television. It is a world constructed around Peter Griffin's perception of himself and his life. It is a world in which Peter is, without knowing it, the protagonist, not just of the show, but of his own reality. The laws of the universe have been calibrated around him. Consequence works differently for Peter, because consequence is not really the point in a world where Peter's experience is the lens through which everything is filtered. On this reading, the cartoon physics are not arbitrary. They are the physics of a world that is, at its root, about one person's self-image. A world that is fundamentally sympathetic to its main character, that bends toward his survival and his comfort and his eventual triumphs, however modest, because it is a world built to tell his story. This is not entirely unusual as theories go. It's essentially a version of genre logic, the recognition that genre fiction operates by different rules depending on whose story is being told. But it takes on an interesting dimension when you start to ask who built this world and why. Because if the heightened reality is Stewie's creation, if the whole universe is Stewie's design, then Peter's charmed life takes on a different meaning. It means that the God of this world has arranged things so that his father figure, however baffling and inadequate, cannot be permanently destroyed. It means that Stewie, for all the threats and the death rays, and the elaborate maternal assassination plots, has built a world where the man who holds his family together cannot be lost. That is not nothing. The second theory is darker, and I want to approach it gently because it has an emotional weight that deserves care. This theory is sometimes called the grief world hypothesis, and it goes like this. Something happened to Peter Griffin, something real and irreversible, somewhere in the past of the story we're watching. And the world of Spooner Street, the bright, bouncing, perpetually self-resetting world of the Griffin family, is not a real place. It is a place Peter built inside his mind, to survive something he couldn't survive any other way. The event, according to this theory, was a drunk driving accident. Peter Saba, who has always had a difficult relationship with alcohol, who has driven impaired more than once in the show's long run, caused an accident that killed his family. Or that should have killed them, and rather than live in a world where that is true, his mind constructed a world where it isn't. Where they're all fine, where Lois is in the kitchen, and Meg is upstairs, and Chris is watching television, and Stewie is plotting, and Brian is at the bar. Where nothing was lost. Where the accident didn't happen. The cartoon logic on this reading is not physics, it's psychology. Everything resets because trauma remembers the good parts. The impossible things happen because grief reaches for magic. The world keeps going because Peter cannot stop going back to the version of his life where everyone is still there. This is a theory that sits in the same emotional territory as a number of well-known animated conspiracy theories. The genre has a weakness for this shape of story, maybe because animation itself is already a form of preservation. The characters don't age, they don't change, they loop back to themselves across the seasons. And the grief metaphor fits the form too well to be entirely accidental. But the specific details of this reading, applied to Peter, have their own particular texture. Consider, in the grief world, Lois is idealized. She is too patient. She forgives too much. She endures too much without truly breaking, without truly leaving, without doing the things a real person with a real breaking point would eventually do. She is the person Peter most needs her to be. Not always, not without complaint, but essentially. Structurally. At the bottom of things. And the children. Chris is uncomplicated, warm, large, easy to love. The son a father can feel uncomplicated affection for, without the difficulty of being truly known. Meg is the repository of everything that goes wrong, the designated failure, the one who absorbs the family's darkness. And if you wanted to build a psychological world in which the guilt for a terrible thing is processed without being directly acknowledged, you might put it all onto the family member who was least defined before the catastrophe. You might make one child carry the weight that the father can't acknowledge carrying himself. And Stewie. Stewie, who was just an infant when the world stopped, who never had the chance to grow up and become real, and who, in Peter's internal world, remained affixed at that earliest stage, brilliant, dramatic, unreachable. Because that is where Peter's memory of him stopped. The grief world theory doesn't insist on any of this as fact. It is, at the end of the day, a reading, a frame through which the material looks different than it does when taken at face value. And some of what it asks you to accept is a heavy lift. That a comedy this broad, this committed to absurdism, this deliberately and joyfully silly, is secretly about something this dark. But here's the strange thing about the theory. It doesn't make the comedy less funny. It doesn't undermine the jokes. If anything, it gives them a different kind of resonance. The way that knowing a clown is sad doesn't make the pratfall less physical, but does make the laughter different. More tender, maybe. More aware of what's underneath the performance. Because if the grief world is real, then every episode is an act of love. Every improbable resolution, every crisis averted, every family dinner that ends without permanent damage, is Peter choosing, over and over, in the most private place in his mind, to keep his family together, to not let the accident be the last thing, to insist against everything on the version of the story where they're still here. And there is something in that, even framed this way, that is not only dark. There is something that is also, in its own strange way, beautiful. Let's talk about a third Peter theory, one that sits somewhere between the first two in terms of emotional weight. This theory concerns Peter's intelligence, or more specifically, the show's curious inconsistency about Peter's intelligence. In the early seasons, Peter is not a genius, but he is reasonably functional. He makes bad decisions, but they're bad decisions that a recognizable human adult might make. He navigates basic social situations. He holds down a job. He is, essentially, an exaggerated comic version of a certain kind of working-class American man. As the seasons progress, something changes. Peter's baseline gets lower. He becomes less functional, less capable, more cartoon. He loses threads of thought faster. He makes connections that are further from logic. He is, in a clinical sense, presenting signs of cognitive decline. The theory is that this is not an accident of inconsistent writing. It is a record. It is the show, however unconsciously, tracking what happens to a man who has been living in a heightened reality, or a grief construction, for 25 years. The longer he lives in the world he built, the less equipped he is for the real one. The more the internal world becomes his only world, the more the faculties required for external navigation atrophy. Peter is not getting dumber because the writers stopped caring. Peter is getting lost. Peter is becoming more and more completely a creature of his own construction, less and less able to function outside of it. And the tragedy, if it is a tragedy, is that no one in his world notices. Or if they do, they keep coming back to the table for dinner anyway. Because the table is still set. And they're all still there. Section 5. Meg Griffin. The lightning rod, the scapegoat, and the secret architect. Let's talk about Meg. Meg Griffin is one of the most interesting characters in the show, and she is interesting precisely because the show pretends she is not. She is interesting because her function, the function the show assigns her, openly and repeatedly, often as the punchline itself, is to be the person things happen to rather than the person things are for. She is the designated recipient of the family's worst impulses, the place where frustration and embarrassment and casual cruelty land when they have nowhere else to go. This is not an accident. It is, the theories argue, a design. The foundational Meg theory is called the lightning rod hypothesis, and it has the unusual distinction of being not just a fan theory, but something the show itself seems to explicitly acknowledge. In Season 10, there is a moment, a quiet moment, easy to miss in the flow of the episode, where one of the characters essentially confirms that Meg's role in the family is deliberate, that she serves as the place where the family's darkness collects and dissipates, that without her in that position, without someone holding the lightning, the damage would distribute unpredictably across the family, reaching the members who couldn't handle it, destabilizing the whole structure. Meg is the lightning rod. She takes the strike so the house doesn't burn. This is, when you sit with it, an extraordinarily dark thing for a show to say about a character who is also a teenager going through high school. It is saying that this family uses her. Not in the way families casually lean on their most resilient member, though that happens too, but structurally. architecturally, that the family would not function as it does without someone in Meg's position absorbing the impact of what would otherwise destroy it. And the question that follows immediately from this is, does she know? The evidence suggests that on some level, yes, she knows. There are episodes, moments in episodes rather, because the show is never quite able to commit fully to Meg as a conscious agent, where she reveals a degree of self-awareness that is genuinely startling, where she demonstrates competence, intelligence, emotional maturity that is so far beyond what the surrounding characters display that it reads not as continuity error but as deliberate contrast. As if she is, beneath the scapegoat surface, the most fully formed person in the family. The one who has looked most clearly at what's actually happening and chosen, with her eyes open, to stay in position. This reading, Meg as knowing sacrifice, as deliberate structural support rather than passive victim, transforms her completely. She stops being pitiable and becomes something much more complicated, something that edges, in certain lights, toward heroic. Because if she understands her function and performs it anyway, if she takes the cruelty and the humiliation and the casual dismissal and uses them as the material from which she constructs the family's protection, then she is doing the most quietly extraordinary thing in the show. She is holding the structure up with her own body. Every insult, every exclusion, every moment she has made the punchline is a strike she absorbs so that the rest of them don't have to. Let's talk about Meg's biology because the theories here are significant. Meg is not Peter Griffin's biological daughter. This is not a fan theory. It is canon, established in a Season 4 episode, where it is revealed that Meg's biological father is a man named Stan Thompson, a man who has essentially no presence in the story, who is brought in briefly for a specific narrative purpose and then allowed to recede. What does it mean for Meg that her father is a stranger? In the context of the lightning rod theory, it might mean quite a lot. If Meg's function in the family was partly determined by the fact that she is, on some unconscious level, categorized as other, as slightly outside, slightly less protected by the bonds that organize the rest of the family, then her biological difference from Peter isn't just a backstory fact. It's structural. It's the thing that made her the lightning rod rather than Chris or Stewie. She is the one who can be used this way because she is the one who was, from the beginning, slightly less than fully inside. This is a theory that requires you to be angry on Meg's behalf, while also recognizing that the thing that made her vulnerable was also what made her, in the end, the most important load-bearing member of the family. The most essential. The most irreplaceable. There is one more Meg theory, quieter than the others, but in some ways the most resonant, about what Meg would be if the lightning rod function were removed. In occasional glimpses throughout the show's run, we see what Meg is like when she is allowed to be herself rather than a function. When she is in a context that doesn't require her to absorb. When she has space and what she is in those moments is formidable. She is articulate in ways the other family members are not. She reads things, actual books, literary things, not just airport bestsellers. She has aesthetic sensibilities, creative instincts, an inner life with genuine texture. She is not, under the performance of inadequacy, inadequate. She is someone who was given a role that her actual nature never matched, and has been playing that role with a kind of grim, devoted professionalism for her entire conscious life. The theory is that if Meg ever fully stopped, if she ever looked at the family and said, "I will not be this anymore," the structure would collapse. The darkness would have nowhere to go. The other members, suddenly bearing their own weights without the buffer, would find themselves unable to carry them. The family depends on Meg in the way that ceilings depend on columns. Not lovingly, not gratefully, the way a ceiling depends on a column. But Meg keeps coming to dinner. She keeps showing up. And every time she does, she chooses again, consciously or not, deliberately or not, to be the thing that holds the house together. That's not nothing. In fact, it might be everything. Section 6. The multiverse, the cancellation, and the theory of two families. In Season 8, Episode 1, the Griffin family goes on a road trip through multiple parallel universes. They visit worlds where evolution took different turns, where history branched, where the familiar faces are arranged in unfamiliar configurations. It is a wildly imaginative episode, and underneath the comedy, it does something quietly significant. It establishes as a matter of in-universe fact that the multiverse is real. Parallel realities exist. Other Griffins exist. The family you're watching is one configuration of something that comes in many configurations. Hold on to that, because it becomes important. Family Guy was canceled. Not theoretically, actually canceled by Fox in 2002. The show ran for 3 seasons, was canceled, aired in reruns, built a DVD-based audience, and was then revived in 2005 based on that audience's demonstrated devotion. It came back. Most discussion of this treats it as a piece of television history, an unusual case of a canceled show getting a second life through changed distribution models. But fan theorists who are allergic to treating anything as simply what it appears to be have a different reading. The theory goes like this. The Family Guy that was canceled in 2002 and the Family Guy that returned in 2005 are not the same show about the same family. They are, in the language the show itself has established, as legitimate, different universes. The evidence for this is more concrete than you might expect. The pre-cancellation Griffin family, the family of seasons 1 through 3, has a different texture from the post-revival family. The differences are often attributed to the normal evolution of a long-running show, the writers finding their voice, the animation improving, the characters becoming more sharply defined. These are all real things. But the theorists argue that the differences are too specific, too directional to be just that. Pre-cancellation. Peter is difficult but human. He is capable of genuine tenderness. He makes mistakes, but he is recognizably a person trying to love his family within the limits of his nature. Post-revival. Peter trends darker, more impulsive, more cruel, more willing to use the people around him in ways that don't resolve comfortably. He becomes increasingly a force of chaos rather than a person navigating chaos. Pre-cancellation. Lois is sharp, capable, occasionally edged with something close to disappointment, but fundamentally grounded. Post-revival. Lois has hidden depths that are darker, the hints of genuine cruelty, the occasional moments where the perfect suburban mother mask slips and reveals something more complicated, more compromised, more real. The show got darker after the revival. Most people accept this, but the theory refuses to accept it as mere tonal drift. It says, the show got darker because the story moved to a darker universe. The family you're watching from season 4 onwards is not quite the same family you were watching before the cancellation. They are close, they are very close, but they are from a branch of the multiverse that diverged somewhere during the 3 years the show was off the air. And what, the theorists ask, happened to the original family? The theory has an answer, and it is not a comfortable one. The original family, the gentler, less jagged, more human Griffins of the early seasons, continued in a universe where the show didn't come back, where the story, as far as the television audience is concerned, simply ended, where Peter and Lois and the kids went on living in a world the audience was no longer watching, without the distorting lens of the camera, without the pressure of maintaining a performance. This theory does something strange to how you feel about the revival. Because the revival, on this reading, is both a continuation and a replacement. It gave the audience something, more of the family, more of the street, more of the world they'd come to care about. But the thing it gave them was not quite the thing they'd had before. It was the next-door version, the parallel universe version. A little harder, a little sharper, a little less gentle. And the original family? They're out there somewhere, in an unobserved universe, growing older in ways the show never tracked, changed by the passage of time in ways animation doesn't allow. This connects to one of the show's most self-aware episodes, the one titled Back to the Pilot, in which Stewie and Brian travel back to the very first episode and interact with their earlier selves. The episode is already rich with meta-commentary. It is the show looking at its own beginning, measuring the distance traveled, acknowledging how much has changed. But the theorists extract from it something more specific. Evidence that the timeline was altered. When Stewie and Brian return to the present after their visit to the pilot episode, the present is not quite the same. Small things are different. Nothing dramatic, nothing that the show makes explicit. but the world they return to has been touched by the visit, has been, at the margins, changed. The theory says this is the moment the two timelines diverged. The Stewie and Brian who traveled back to the pilot created a branching point, an alteration in the timeline that produced a slightly different present than the one they left. The present they returned to is not perfectly identical to the one they departed from. It is close, very close, but at the quantum level of detail, at the level of small accumulated differences that are hard to name but easy to feel, it is distinct. And this theory nests elegantly inside the larger cancellation theory. The timeline alteration in Back to the Pilot is not just a clever bit of self-referential comedy. It is, in the mythology that the theorists have built, an explanation for why the post-revival show feels different. Not just tonal drift, not just writer evolution, not just the passage of time, a genuine, in-universe, causally grounded divergence. Two families, one street, different timelines, running in parallel, and the one you're watching depends on which thread you picked up. There is a final angle to this theory that takes it somewhere more personal. The theory notes that the 3 years the show was off the air, the 3 years during which the writers scattered, the audience rebuilt itself through reruns and DVD sales, and the cultural context shifted enough that the show's return felt like a different kind of phenomenon than its beginning. Those 3 years were real. They happened to real people who worked on the show and to real people who loved it. And the show that came back in 2005 was made by people who had lived through those 3 years, who had processed the cancellation, mourned it in some cases, moved on and come back, who were different in small and large ways from the people who made seasons 1 through 3. The show being different after the revival is not just a multiverse event. It is an entirely human phenomenon. It is what happens when the same story is picked up by slightly different hands, the hands that love it the same but carry it differently because of everything that happened between the putting down and the picking back up. Both the fictional explanation and the human one are true. They're both true at the same time. Section 7. The Purgatory Theory, a street where no one can leave. Here's a thing that happens on Spooner Street. People die. They die with some regularity. They die in dramatic ways and in absurd ways, and in ways that are treated seriously and in ways that are treated as jokes. They die and they come back. They die multiple times. They die in alternate timelines and then exist in the primary one. Death on Spooner Street is not a door. It is a revolving door. And this, the purgatory theorists argue, is not a feature of the show's relaxed relationship with consequence. It is the point. It is the deepest structural clue about what Spooner Street actually is. The purgatory theory holds that the Griffin family and the neighborhood around them are not in a physical location in the conventional sense. They are in a transitional space, a place between what they were and what they need to become. A place where the business of living is played out in a loop until it can be resolved. Purgatory, in the theological tradition the theory draws on, is not a punishment. It is a process. It is a place where things that are unfinished get finished, where the account is balanced, where the work that wasn't done in life gets done before whatever comes next. Applied to Spooner Street, every character on the street is there because they have something unresolved, something they couldn't complete or understand or face in whatever their life was before. And the loop, the endless cycling of episodes, the same dynamics recurring with slight variations, the deaths that don't stay dead, the consequences that reset, is not meaningless repetition. It is practice. It is the same lesson being offered in slightly different forms until it is finally learned. Who is in purgatory on this reading, and what is each person working on? Peter's work is obvious. It is the work of becoming the man his family deserves, of growing into the capacity for genuine care that he clearly has in his best moments, but cannot consistently access. Every episode where he causes chaos and then finds his way back to the people he loves is a version of the same lesson, that love is not enough on its own, that you have to show up for people in ways that require something from you. He hasn't learned it yet. He keeps taking the class. Lois's work is subtler. She is, on the surface, the most functional person in the household, the one who holds things together, the one who appears to be doing the most. But the theory suggests that her unfinished work is about authenticity, about the gap between the self she presents and the self she actually is. Lois has depths that she doesn't show, desires she doesn't acknowledge, a capacity for darkness that she keeps carefully managed. Her purgatory is the work of integration, of becoming someone who can be all of herself in the same room. Brian's work, and this connects to the CIA theory in an interesting way, is about acceptance, specifically about accepting what he is rather than performing what he wishes he were. He is not a human being. He is not going to become a published novelist who is taken seriously by the New York literary establishment. He is an engineered consciousness in a dog's body who has one extraordinary friendship and a gift for honesty when he can access it. His purgatory is the work of loving what he actually has rather than grieving what he doesn't. Stewie's work is the hardest to articulate because Stewie is so clearly already beyond normal purgatory. But in the context of the self-created God theory, his work might be about learning to receive. He can create. He can design. He can build universes. But he is still, after all this time, not entirely sure how to let anyone in. His purgatory is the work of being vulnerable enough to be known. And Meg's purgatory is the work of choosing herself, of deciding that the lightning rod role, however functional, however structurally important, is not the whole story. Her lesson, offered to her again and again in episode after episode, is the same. You are allowed to be more than what this family needs you to be. You are allowed to take up space. She hasn't learned it yet either, but she's still in class. The purgatory theory has a particular quality that makes it different from the other major theories in this collection. The others are primarily about what the world is, what kind of place Spooner Street is, what kind of beings these characters are, what ontological status the Griffin family occupies. The purgatory theory is primarily about what the world is for. It gives the loop a purpose. It takes the cyclical, self-resetting nature of the show, a nature that could be read as meaningless or as a failure of consequence, and reframes it as a process with a direction. The direction is towards something better. Every episode is a chance. Every crisis is a test. Every moment where a character chooses the more generous, more honest, more loving version of themselves is a small movement in the right direction. And every moment where they choose the opposite is not a failure but a data point, the lesson not yet completed, the class to be retaken, the chapter to be reread. This is, in its own way, a profoundly hopeful theory. It says that nothing is wasted, that the chaos serves a purpose, that underneath all the noise and absurdity and catastrophe of 25 seasons, there is a process running. Patient, unhurried, committed to the long game. A process of becoming, and the street is the container for that process. The characters cannot leave, not permanently, not in ways that stick, because they are not done. They are still in the middle of their work, and the loop will continue as kindly and as long as it needs to until the work is finished. There is a variant of the purgatory theory that adds one more layer, and it is possibly the most emotionally resonant variant of the whole framework. This variant says that the characters on Spooner Street are not being punished or processed. They are being waited for. There is something, some endpoint, some resolution, some moment of arrival that the structure of the world is building toward. And the loop continues not because the characters have failed to learn their lessons, but because the arrival point has not yet been reached. Because the story has not yet arrived at the moment it was always moving toward. What is that moment? The theory is deliberately vague about this because the theory is wise enough to know that if you name the endpoint, you diminish it. You make it too specific, too manageable, too easy to dismiss. But the suggestion is the moment the family is fully known to each other, the moment the performances are set down, the moment Peter and Lois look at each other without the armor of their respective roles, the moment Stewie doesn't need the evil genius act anymore because he already feels safe, the moment Brian writes the sentence that says what he actually means, the moment Meg is seen, truly seen, by someone who matters. The loop continues because none of those moments has happened yet. And Spooner Street, patient, looping, endlessly resetting, is still waiting. Section 8. the CIA, the shared universe, and the conspiracy beneath the surface. Let's pull back from the characters for a moment and look at the world around them. Spooner Street exists inside a neighborhood. The neighborhood exists inside a town. The town exists inside a state and a country and a world. And the world, the theorists have noticed, has a particular relationship with the institutions that govern it. Specifically, intelligence agencies show up a lot. Not always overtly, not always with badges and official acknowledgement, but the structural presence of government programs and covert operations in the background of the show is, the theorists argue, too consistent to be accidental. And when you line up the connections between the Family Guy universe and the wider McFarlane universe, the picture that emerges is significantly more complex than a simple animated sitcom should produce. Let's start with a character who doesn't get enough theoretical attention, Susie Swanson. Susie is the infant daughter of Joe and Bonnie Swanson, born in a Season 7 episode after a pregnancy that lasted considerably longer than 9 months by the show's internal timeline. She is, to all appearances, a normal baby, except for the fact that in at least one episode, Susie demonstrates knowledge she cannot possibly have. She speaks, or is heard speaking, in a voiceover that the show frames ambiguously, in a way that is too sophisticated, too contextually aware, too strategically precise for an infant who has not yet developed language. The theory, which draws heavily on the CIA experiment framework established for Brian, Susie Swanson is not a normal child. She is a remote-operated consciousness. Specifically, she is a vessel for an intelligence community figure from the shared McFarlane universe, placed there with access to the Swanson household for reasons that become clear when you consider who Joe Swanson is and what he might know. Why would an intelligence operative install a remote consciousness in a neighbor's infant? The theory goes various directions here, but the most elegant version says, Joe Swanson, specifically Joe's past. Joe Swanson, police officer, wheelchair user, husband, father, friend. Joe is presented as the most straightforwardly heroic of Peter's friends, a man who lost the use of his legs in the line of duty, who continues to serve the community despite his disability, who is reliable and principled in ways that others demonstrably cannot be. But his backstory has peculiarities. The story of how he lost his legs has changed across episodes. The details don't align cleanly. And Joe's particular set of skills, tactical, psychological, logistical, are more consistent with a trained intelligence asset than a municipal police officer. The theory, Joe Swanson was placed on Spooner Street. His cover is the police department. His actual function is observation and management of the neighborhood, which, given what we know about Spooner Street, includes at minimum one possible CIA experiment in Brian, one temporal anomaly in Stewie, and one household that is, by any measure, a local center of unpredictable causality. Joe is the watcher, and Susie is the additional set of eyes that the agency decided was necessary when the opportunity presented itself. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, an extraordinarily wealthy man, even by the exaggerated standards of the show's wealth portrayal. A man who commands resources that should not be available to a private citizen. A man who has, across the series, demonstrated access to institutional power, corporate, political, medical, that goes far beyond the normal reach of even a very successful businessman. There is an episode, Season 11, Episode 3, in which it is revealed or strongly implied that Carter Pewterschmidt, or a company connected to him, has developed a cure for cancer and sat on it. This is not presented as the show's central concern. It is used for comedic and dramatic purposes, and then, in the way the show allows things to be used and then set down, it is essentially dropped. But the theorists do not drop it. If Carter has a cancer cure and has chosen not to release it, the question is why. The simple version, profit motive, pharmaceutical industry logic, the cold calculus of a man who sees health as a market rather than a right. And this is probably the version the writers had in mind. But the more interesting version, what if Carter's relationship with the institutional powers that run the world of this show is more complex than that? What if the suppression of the cure is not an individual decision, but a coordinated one? A decision made at the level of the network of interest that connects Carter to the government, to the intelligence community, to the same institutional substrate that we've been tracking across every other conspiracy in this mythology? What if Carter is not the top of the hierarchy but a node in it? This reframes his extraordinary wealth, not as the reward for business acumen, but as the payment for services rendered to a network that needs a public-facing civilian to hold certain things in place. His money is not the point. The money is the cover. The point is the access, the leverage. The particular position in the world's machinery that Carter Pewterschmidt occupies, which nobody questions, because he is, on the surface, just a very rich old man. Let's talk about Quagmire's father. Dan Quagmire appears in one episode and is never heard from again. But what he reveals in that episode is significant enough to have generated years of theoretical speculation. Dan is a decorated Navy veteran with connections to the kind of specialized, low-visibility military operations that sit in the gray zone between military and intelligence work. He has knowledge he should not have. He has a relationship with his son that is built around silence and misdirection in ways that are more tactical than personal. The theory, Glenn Quagmire's particular skill set, his ability to move through social situations with extraordinary agility, his capacity for manipulation and misdirection, his comfort with ambiguity and moral complexity, was taught, not native. He was trained by his father or by his father's network in the arts of a particular kind of operational work. Quagmire is, on this reading, not just a morally complicated character. He is a former or active operative who has taken cover in the civilian life of a commercial airline pilot and a suburban neighbor. And the particular neighborhood in which he lives, directly across from a possible CIA experiment, next door to an intelligence asset, 2 doors down from a temporally unstable infant demigod, is not a coincidence. Let's bring this together. The neighborhood around the Griffins, on this reading, is not a normal neighborhood. It is a monitored environment. It is a zone of managed observation. The strange things that happen on Spooner Street, the inexplicable physics, the recurring crises, the improbable survivals, do not happen randomly. They happen in a context that has been arranged for them. A context where the watchers are close, where interventions can happen quickly, where data can be collected. The show on this reading is not just a comedy about a dysfunctional family. It is a record of an ongoing observation program. The camera through which we watch the Griffins is not the show's camera. It is the program's camera. It is the institutional gaze of the forces that built this neighborhood, populated it, arranged its components, and are watching to see what happens. What are they watching for? The theory doesn't fully agree on the answer. But the most compelling version says, Stewie. They are watching Stewie. They know somehow that the infant on Spooner Street is not an ordinary infant. They know that there is something in that house that does not fit any normal category. And they have built the neighborhood around him, filled it with assets and watchers, arranged the family around him, to observe what a being like this does when it believes it is living an ordinary life. And Stewie, who is ancient and brilliant and the creator of the universe, plays along. Because even gods sometimes want to be watched. There's something almost tender in that final thought, if you let yourself feel it. The most powerful being in existence, sitting in a high chair, letting the cameras roll, pretending not to notice them. Pretending, for the length of an episode, for the length of a season, for the length of 25 years, to be just a baby. Just a baby on a street in a town that doesn't exist. Letting the people who love him, and the people who are paid to watch him, think that this is all there is. Just this. Just them. Just dinner, and the couch, and the television, and the dog at the door. Just home. Section 9. Quagmire Cleveland Joe. The Hidden Histories of the Neighbors. The neighbors of the Griffin family have their own mythologies, their own buried stories, their own theories that run beneath the surface of the show's brightly colored exterior. We've touched on some of them already. Now let's go deeper. Glenn Quagmire is one of the most theorized characters in the show's history, and the theories about him run a wide spectrum, from the genuinely comedic to the genuinely dark. Let's start with the one that recasts him most completely. The theory of Quagmire as a man in full, as opposed to the one-note caricature the show increasingly leans into in later seasons. begins with a simple observation. Glenn Quagmire is excellent at everything that requires expertise. He is a licensed commercial airline pilot, which requires years of training, thousands of hours in the cockpit, and a level of technical proficiency that is genuinely demanding. He is physically capable in ways that go beyond the comedic exaggeration of the show's cartoon physics. He is, in the rare episodes that let him be a full person rather than a joke engine, emotionally intelligent in ways that catch you off guard. He reads people with the precision of someone who is trained to read people. The intelligence operative theory we touched on in the last section sits on top of a deeper question. Who is Quagmire underneath the performance? The performance is the lust, the catchphrase, the string of questionable decisions. It is a very good performance, a decades-long performance, one that keeps everyone in his vicinity from looking too closely at the capable, complicated, technically sophisticated human being operating the character. Because if you look too closely, you start to see things that don't add up. The precise situational awareness, the comfort with operational risk, the ability to navigate crisis without the panic you'd expect from someone who is just, as presented, a very enthusiastic bachelor. The theory, Quagmire is exactly what he appears to be, on the surface, by design. The surface is cover. The cover is so thick, so consistent, so completely performed, that it has essentially become genuine, the way cover, maintained long enough, eventually does. He has been Glenn Quagmire, the lovable neighbor, for so long that he has almost forgotten, on most days, that he was something else first. But the training remains, the skills remain. And in the episodes where the show accidentally lets him be competent, where the writing reaches for more than the catchphrase, you can see them. There is a particularly interesting application of this theory to one of the show's most famous moments, the Season 8 episode in which Quagmire delivers a brutal, detailed, accurate assessment of everything Brian has become and everything Brian has failed to be. The speech is remarkable for its precision. It is not a comedic takedown, it is a comprehensive, point-by-point accounting of a person's failures. It covers Brian's fraudulent intellectualism, his treatment of Lois, his failed writing career, his abandonment of his son, and his overall hypocrisy. Every point is correct. Every point is supported by evidence from the show's run. How does Quagmire know all of this? He has been watching. He has been cataloging. Not because he and Brian are close, they are famously not, but because watching, cataloging, and understanding the people in his immediate environment is what Quagmire was built to do. The speech is not an emotional outburst. It is a debriefing. It is the report of an observer who has been paying closer attention than anyone suspected. Cleveland Brown's theories cluster around one central question. What is Cleveland doing here? Not here on the show, his presence in the narrative is well established, but here in this neighborhood, here in this particular configuration of houses and people. Cleveland is, by almost any measure, the most functional adult in the immediate social circle. He is patient. He is perceptive. He is capable of genuine empathy in a social group that doesn't value empathy highly. He is the one who most consistently says the thing that is actually true about the situation, even when no one wants to hear it. The theory, Cleveland was not placed on Spooner Street randomly. He was placed there because his particular set of qualities, patience, perception, the ability to hold steady in the presence of ongoing absurdity without being destabilized by it, made him the ideal long-term observer. Not an intelligence operative in the Quagmire or Joe model. Something different. Something more like a recorder. A witness. Someone whose function is to see things clearly and remember them accurately, even in a neighborhood where clarity and accuracy are persistently under assault. Cleveland as keeper of the record. Cleveland as the person who, in whatever accounting is eventually made of what happened on Spooner Street, will be the one who can say, here is what actually occurred. His later departure from the neighborhood, the spin-off, the years away, is, on this reading, significant. It suggests that his observation function was completed, that he had seen what he needed to see, recorded what needed recording, and was released from the assignment to go live his own story. His return to the main show years later, quiet and without fanfare, suggests that the assignment was not entirely complete after all. There was more to see. There is always more to see. Joe Swanson's hidden history is worth returning to in more depth, because there is another dimension to it that the CIA theory alone doesn't fully capture. Joe lost the use of his legs. The story of how has, as we've noted, varied across tellings. The most famous version involves a conflict with the Grinch on a rooftop, which is a joke, but the joke's recurrence, the show's persistent return to the inconsistency as a source of comedy, suggests that the inconsistency itself is meaningful. The show keeps drawing attention to the fact that the story changes. Not because the writers can't keep track, but because the changing story is itself a clue. What do you do with a backstory that keeps changing? You have two options. You conclude that it's sloppy writing, or you conclude that the character is lying. Not for malicious reasons, necessarily, but for reasons. The way someone who is involved in something that cannot be officially acknowledged constructs a plausible civilian narrative that he can offer to the people in his life without having to tell the actual story. Joe's actual story on this reading is classified. What he says about his injury is the version he's authorized to give. It changes because the authorized version gets periodically updated, refined, the edges smoothed differently depending on the context. He is protecting something. He is maintaining a cover. And the thing underneath the cover, the actual event, the actual mission, the actual reason he is on this street, in this body, in this life, is something the show has never told us and may never tell us. But it's there, underneath, as consistent as anything else in the mythology. Now let's bring this section together the same way we brought the last one together. The neighborhood around the Griffins is not random. The people on the street are not random. Each of the major figures in Peter's social circle has something that serves, deliberately or accidentally, consciously or not, the larger project of whatever is happening on Spooner Street. Quagmire has operational skills and proximity. Cleveland has perceptive stability and the capacity to remember accurately. Joe has police cover and institutional connection. And each of them has, in different ways and at different times, occupied the role of witness. Witness to what? To a family trying to hold itself together, to a God learning to be a person, to an experiment trying to become a soul, to a lightning rod choosing every day to stay in position, to something that is, underneath all the comedy and the chaos and the decades of episodes, genuinely worth watching, genuinely worth being there for. Section 10. Death, Immortality, and the Rules of Ending. In Season 2, Episode 1, the Grim Reaper comes to Spooner Street. He comes for Bill, the Griffin's neighbor, but he trips. He falls on the Griffin's front stairs, sprains his ankle, and is briefly incapacitated. And during the period of his incapacitation, no one on Earth can die. This is played for comedy. The absurdity of the premise, death stymied by a home safety hazard, is part of the joke. But the theorists look at this episode and see something much more interesting than a comedy premise. They see a structural revelation about how mortality works in this universe. Death is a physical entity. He can be injured. His incapacitation has immediate global consequences. He is not a metaphor or an abstraction. He is a person, a being with a body and a schedule and a job that requires his personal presence. And if he can be injured, he can be stopped. The rules of ending, as the theorists call them, are the most fascinating element of the show's relationship with mortality. Because the relationship is fascinatingly inconsistent. Characters die and return. Characters survive things that should be unsurvivable. Certain characters, Peter, Brian, Stewie, seem to have an almost categorical resistance to permanent death, while others, minor characters, one-episode presences, the collateral damage of the show's more chaotic storytelling, die and stay dead. The question the theorists ask, is this inconsistency random or does it follow a pattern? And the answer they arrive at, it follows a pattern. Specifically, it follows the pattern of narrative importance. Characters who are essential to the show's central story, to the ongoing project of whatever the Griffin household represents, whatever the observation program is watching for, whatever the purgatorial process is working toward, cannot die permanently. They are protected, not by the plot armor of lazy writing, but by something built into the world, something that ensures the story can continue until the work is finished. Characters who are not essential, who have served their narrative function, who have been in the story as long as the story needed them, can die and stay dead, and sometimes do. This is, in the language of the purgatory theory, entirely logical. You cannot finish your work if you're dead. The process requires presence, and so the beings who are most essential to the process are held in place by a mortality system that is calibrated to the needs of the story. Death, the character, the entity with the ankle and the schedule, is not a random force. He is a process manager. He comes for the people whose work is done. This brings us back to Brian's death in Season 12 in a new light. If death is a process manager, and if the beings who are essential to the process are protected from permanent death, then Brian's death was, at the moment it happened, a scheduling event. It was death concluding that Brian's essential function in the story had been completed, that whatever Brian was there to do, he had done. And Stewie's intervention, the time travel, the prevention of the accident, was a challenge to that assessment. Stewie looked at Death's schedule and said, "Wrong, he is not done. He has more to do. I know because I put him here and I did not put him here for this to be the end." And the universe, because Stewie is its maker, conceded the point. This is a theory that reframes what looks like a cheap reversal. The death played seriously for a few episodes and then undone, as something with actual structural weight. Stewie overrode a cosmic scheduling decision. He inserted his will into the machinery of mortality and changed the outcome. And this is not a small thing. This is a god asserting his authority over his own creation. The question it leaves open, was death wrong? Did Brian still have essential work to do? Or was Stewie's intervention an override made for personal reasons, because he couldn't lose his companion, couldn't face the street without him? That bent the rules of the process he himself designed? The most honest answer is probably both. Both things are true at once. Brian had more to do, and Stewie couldn't bear to lose him, and these two truths are not in competition. They are the same truth told from different altitudes. Let's talk about the immortality question more broadly, because it extends beyond the main cast. The show's secondary characters have a different relationship with mortality than the core cast. They die more readily. They stay dead more reliably. They are not protected by the same narrative necessity. But there is one category of secondary character that the theories have particularly focused on. The characters who recur despite dying. People who die in episodes and are then seen alive in later episodes without explanation. The show, which uses continuity loosely as a matter of policy, treats these recurrences as normal. But the theorists treat them as data. If death is a process manager, and if the process requires certain characters to remain present until their work is done, then the characters who keep coming back after dying are characters whose work is not done. They have been assessed, by death or by whatever makes these determinations, as essential enough to continue. Their deaths were previews or errors or tests, not final events. This reading makes every unexplained resurrection meaningful. It makes every instance of someone showing up alive after being killed into evidence of the same underlying logic. The story needs you here. The process is not finished with you yet. And the ones who stay dead, the ones who don't come back, they're the ones whose chapter closed, whose work was completed, whose contribution to whatever is being built on Spooner Street was given and received and released. There is something quiet and dignified in that, if you can find it underneath the comedy. There is one final element of the death mythology that deserves attention before we move on. Death as a character is lonely. This is played for comedy. The Grim Reaper wanting to be invited to parties, wanting friends, wanting connection. But as we have established, the comedy in this show often sits on top of something real. And the something real, in Death's case, is the isolation of a being whose function makes genuine relationship impossible. How do you befriend death? How do you sustain a relationship with someone whose essential nature is to end things? There is a structural asymmetry in every relationship death has. He will outlast everyone he cares about. He has outlasted everyone he has ever cared about. His natural state is bereavement. And yet he keeps trying. The theorists connect this to the show's broader theme of beings who are out of place in the world they inhabit. Stewie too large for his circumstances, Brian too human for his body, Meg too capable for her assigned role. Death is too permanent for a world that he himself keeps making impermanent. He is the ending that lives among the things he ends, wanting to belong, knowing he cannot, showing up anyway at the party. He shows up anyway. He always shows up. And perhaps that is the deepest thing the show has to say about the nature of persistence. That the ending itself is what keeps trying to stay. That even the thing whose whole job is to close doors keeps looking for one that's open. Section 11, the simulation, the dream, and the question of what is real. There is a school of theory that sits above all the others, that encompasses them and asks the most fundamental question of the whole mythology. The question is this: is any of it real? Not real in the sense of it being a TV show, but we all know it is a TV show. Real in the sense of, within the fiction, within the world as the characters experience it, is the world they are experiencing a world that exists independently of their perception of it? Or is it constructed? Is it generated? Is it, in the vocabulary of our current moment, a simulation? The simulation theory, applied to the Family Guy universe, begins with Stewie. As we established in the second section, Stewie created the universe. He pressed a button and the Big Bang happened. He is, in some meaningful sense, the architect of the reality in which the show takes place. But the simulation theory goes further than the creator-God theory. It does not just say that Stewie made the universe. It says that the universe is currently running inside Stewie's technology. That the physical world of Spooner Street, the Rhode Island coastline, the wider world of America and the planet and the human race, all of it is not an independent physical reality, but a computational environment. A simulation running on Stewie's equipment in Stewie's room. The evidence the theorists point to is threefold. First, the physics. The laws of physics in the Family Guy universe are visibly different from the laws of physics in our universe. Things that should kill people don't. Objects behave inconsistently. Scale is unreliable. These are not just animation limitations. They are, on the simulation reading, the artifacts of a simulation that is running at less than full resolution in certain areas. The parts of the world that matter to the story are rendered fully. The parts that don't are rougher, more variable, subject to the kind of rule inconsistency you get when the processing resources are being spent elsewhere. Second, the resets. The show's famous disregard for lasting consequence, the things that happen and are then undone, the deaths that reverse, the catastrophes that resolve, is one of the clearest signatures of a simulated environment. Simulations can be rolled back. They can have checkpoints. They can be run with different parameters. The resets are not narrative convenience. They are the simulation operator choosing to rerun a sequence. Third, the characters who seem aware. Stewie, obviously, but also, in specific and isolated moments, certain other characters who seem to look past the edge of the constructed reality, who seem for just a moment to perceive the simulation rather than just existing inside it. These moments are rare and brief, and the show quickly moves away from them. But they happen. The most interesting sub-theory within the simulation framework concerns what happens after Season 6. Season 6 is when the show returned from its second major creative upheaval. A period of change in the writing room, a shift in tone, an evolution in what the show thought it was doing. And some theorists have argued that what happened at Season 6 is not just a tonal shift, but a narrative event. Specifically, the simulation was restarted. The argument goes the Stewie as operator model predicts that he would occasionally find the simulation's results unsatisfactory and restart it. Not from the very beginning, that would require recreating too much, but from a convenient checkpoint. A point where the variables were still open enough that the new run might produce different results. Season 6 as checkpoint. The world before Season 6 and the world after it as, in a meaningful sense, different runs of the same simulation. This accounts for the most persistent complaint from long-term fans, that the post-Season 6 show is different in ways that are hard to quantify but easy to feel. The characters have different baselines. The world has a different texture. The show feels to people who have watched the whole run like it is the same but not quite. Because it is the same. It's the same parameters mostly, the same characters, the same street, the same family. But it's a new run, a new attempt. The previous version ended at the checkpoint and a new version started. carrying forward the elements that were worth carrying forward and leaving behind the ones that weren't. There is a related theory, a softer theory, one that doesn't require the full simulation framework, that asks whether the world of the show might be a dream. Specifically, whose dream? The candidates are, interestingly, both strong. Brian is the most tempting answer. He is the character who most consistently occupies the role of the show's consciousness, the one through whom we access interiority, the one whose perspective the show most frequently privileges, the one who reads and thinks and reaches for meaning in ways the other characters don't. If the world is being dreamed by anyone, the structure of the show suggests it might be him. But the dream of Brian would be a painful dream. It would be a dream in which he is always a dog in a human world, always slightly less than he wants to be, always failing at the things that matter most to him. That is not the dream of someone at peace. That is the dream of someone working something out. The other candidate is Peter. The dream of Peter would be a dream constructed around safety. The improbable survivals, the forgiving resets, the world that keeps giving him chances. The dream of a man who is, at bottom, terrified that the good things he has will be taken from him, building a world where they can't be. Both of these have texture. Both of them map onto the show's material in ways that illuminate rather than reduce it. And the most encompassing version of the theory, the one that nests most comfortably inside everything else we've discussed, is this. It is Brian's dream that is being dreamed inside Stewie's simulation. The simulation was built to run one specific experience for one specific observer. And that observer is the companion the god built for himself, dreaming the life they both share inside the universe the god made. A dream inside a simulation, inside a god's creation. And somehow, down at the bottom of all that architecture, a family having dinner, the warmth of the kitchen light, the smell of whatever Lois is making, the sound of the television in the next room, the baby upstairs with his blueprints, the dog at the table with his newspaper. All of it dreamed, all of it simulated, all of it in some technical sense not real. And yet the love is real, isn't it? Whatever the substrate, whatever the mechanism, whatever the ontological status of the world that contains it, the love is real. The wanting to stay, the choosing to come back, the inability, even for a god with all the tools to simply end it, to let it end, that's real. That has to be real. Section 12. The Creator God. Theory. Who is really running Spooner Street? We have been working our way toward this section for a long time. Let's arrive at it gently. The Creator God theory is the theory that unifies everything else. It is the framework within which all the other theories find their most coherent arrangement. It is, in a sense, the theory of theories, the one that explains why the other ones work. And it starts and ends with Stewie Griffin. We have established Stewie created the universe. This is canonical. Stewie is his own ancestor, creating a closed causal loop that makes him, in the deepest philosophical sense, self-created. This is canonical. Stewie has access to technology, time travel, dimensional travel, the remote control that made the Big Bang, that places him categorically outside the normal rules of the world he inhabits. This is canonical. Stewie has built, in Brian, a companion whose qualities seem designed, rather than accidental, designed to match his own needs with precision. This is strongly implied by the evidence. Stewie has, on at least one occasion, overridden the mortality system of the universe he created in order to preserve that companion. This is canonical. What the Creator God theory adds to this foundation is a frame. The frame is all of it, the entire show, every episode, every character, every arc, every crisis and resolution and relationship and running joke. All of it is happening inside a space that Stewie maintains and operates and, at some level, controls. Not the scripts, not the jokes, not the specific events of specific episodes. The show is not claiming that Stewie wrote season 14 or decided that Cleveland would get a spinoff. The theory is not about creative authorship at the level of the writer's room. It is about ontological authorship, about what it means to be the creator of a reality rather than just a character within it. And what it means on this reading is that Stewie is present in everything, not as an actor in every scene, he doesn't need to be, but as the ground, as the foundational condition. The universe runs on him the way a program runs on a processor. He is the reason there is something, rather than nothing. Why would a being of this nature put himself in an infant's body in a dysfunctional family? The question of why a god would take human form is not a new question. It's one of the oldest questions in religious philosophy. And the answers that tradition has offered are interesting to hold up against the Stewie mythology. The standard theological answers: to know suffering from the inside, to experience limitation, to make contact with the creatures of the creation in a way that would not be possible from outside it. The Stewie-specific answers extrapolated from the evidence. Because the alternative is incomprehensible loneliness. Because omnipotence sustained indefinitely becomes its own kind of prison. A prison of capability, in which there is nothing you cannot do and therefore nothing that retains the quality of genuine experience. Because the only thing left after you have made everything is to give up making and start being. He put himself in the crib because the crib is the only place in the universe he couldn't engineer an outcome for. He put himself in a family because the family is the only relationship he couldn't optimize. He put himself in the position of small and dependent and needy because those are the positions he'd never occupied before. Because after all this time, after the Big Bang and the Renaissance and the time travel and the dimensional hopping, he had never just been a child. He wanted to try it. He wanted to see what it was like to need things, to want things and not be able to simply create them, to reach for something and find it just out of range. He wanted, in the most fundamental sense, to be surprised. Now let's add the show's meta level to the theory, because the creator-god theory, fully stated, doesn't just describe Stewie. It describes something about the relationship between Seth MacFarlane and his work. Seth MacFarlane is the creator of this universe. He made it. He voices Stewie. He voices Peter. He voices Quagmire. He is, in the real world, the god of this fictional reality. And the character he voices in his own natural speaking voice, the one that requires no performance, no accent, no exaggeration, is Brian. This is not incidental. Voice actors make specific choices. When MacFarlane decided to voice Brian in his own register, without the layer of performance that separates him from the other characters, he was making a statement about identification. About where, in the mythology he created, he actually lives. Not in the loud father at the center of the story. Not in the infant demigod at its edge. In the dog, in the failed novelist. In the brilliant, lonely, self-aware, perpetually aspiring creature who never quite manages to become what he believes he should be. MacFarlane put himself in the story as Brian. And the theory says he also put himself in the story as Stewie. Not in the voice is a performance, the voice is the costume, but in the nature. In the thing that creates and then lives inside its creation, watching what it made, occasionally intervening, trying very hard not to need what it built. The creator of the universe and the author of the universe. Both of them, inside the same story, finding each other on a street in a fictional town, driving across the country together, sitting at a bar talking about books. That is what this show is about. That is the theory at the bottom of all the theories. The god and the writer looking for each other in the world they made together. Bonus Section 1. Ernie the Giant. Chicken pa bapoyan. The Force from Outside. There is an episode in Season 4 where Peter Griffin gets into a fight with a giant chicken. Not metaphorically. Literally. A chicken the size of a man, with apparent intelligence and physical capabilities well beyond those of any bird in the natural world, finds Peter on the street and begins fighting him. The fight continues for several minutes of screen time, travels through multiple locations, destroys significant property, and ends with the chicken apparently defeated. Peter returns home. Life continues. And then the chicken comes back, and they fight again. And this happens multiple times across the show's run, each iteration as inexplicable as the last. The joke is the inexplicability. The comedy is the commitment. The straight-faced, beautifully animated, completely earnest execution of a fight scene that has no reason to be as long or as serious as it is. The bit works because it refuses to be just a bit. It insists on being a full thing. But the theorists look at Ernie the giant chicken, whose name is given, whose backstory is sketched in one of the episodes as involving something about an expired coupon. And they see something that the show, even in its commitment, doesn't fully explain. They see a force from outside the constructed world. The theory: Ernie is not a being native to the world of Spooner Street. He is an intrusion. A thing that comes from beyond the edges of the simulation, or the dream, or the God's creation, or whatever framework you use to describe what this world is. He is what happens when the constructed world encounters something that was not built into it. Something that arrived from somewhere else, that obeys different rules, that cannot be fully processed by the reality it has entered. The fights between Peter and Ernie on this reading are not random comedy premises. They are the world defending its boundaries. Peter, who is, in several of the theories we've discussed, the central figure of the constructed reality, the person around whom the world was shaped, is the one who fights the intrusion. Because the world cannot fight for itself. It needs an agent, and Peter, for all his dysfunction, is the agent it has. Every fight is the simulation encountering a foreign element. Every victory is the simulation maintaining its coherence. And every time Ernie comes back, alive, unchanged, undefeated in any permanent sense, it is a reminder that the outside cannot be fully sealed out. That whatever lives beyond the edges of the world Stewie made is persistent, is patient, is capable of coming back. The detail that the whole conflict apparently began over an expired coupon is, on this reading, deliberately absurd. The actual cause of the intrusion is unimportant and unknowable. The chicken is just the shape the intrusion takes, the interface between the outside and the inside. The coupon is the story Peter tells himself, because the true explanation would be too large to hold. The world is pushing in. Peter keeps pushing back. Neither of them can stop. This theory gives the chicken fights a significance they are almost certainly not intended to have. But significance has a way of arriving where it wasn't invited, in stories that have been watched and loved long enough. And the image it produces is striking. A man on a street in a fictional town, fighting, over and over, something that should not be there, not knowing why, not understanding what he represents in the fight. Just getting up every time and swinging. Because that is what the man in the constructed world does. Because that is what the story needs him to do. Peter Griffin, defender of the reality that was built around him, fighting the impossible with his bare hands. And mostly winning. Bonus Section 2. Lois, Carter, and the family that built her. We have talked about Lois Griffin primarily in relation to other characters, as Peter's wife, as Stewie's mother, as the structural center of the household. But Lois has her own mythology, and it is worth dwelling in. The dominant theory about Lois begins with Carter Pewterschmidt, her father, whose combination of vast wealth, institutional power, and casual cruelty has been noted in earlier sections. Carter is, in the standard reading, simply a rich patriarch, a comedic figure whose excess functions as class satire. But the deeper reading of Carter focuses on what he produced. He produced Lois. And Lois, the theorists argue, is not who she appears to be. The surface Lois is competent, patient, musical, maternal, occasionally sharp, occasionally dark around the edges. A woman who chose a chaotic, difficult man over the smooth life her upbringing would have predicted. Who has been navigating the consequences of that choice ever since. But the theory of Lois as constructed is interested in something more specific. The way Lois functions as a stabilizing force in a household that should not be stable. The way she absorbs, manages, and dissipates the chaos generated by Peter without ever quite breaking. The way she is, again and again, exactly what the household needs her to be, exactly when it needs her. The theory: Lois was not simply a woman who fell in love with Peter Griffin. She was ba-ba. Not necessarily consciously, not necessarily with full knowledge of what she was walking into, placed adjacent to him. Carter, who has connections to institutional forces that run deeper than his public persona suggests, had reason to want someone close to Peter. Someone capable. Someone who could manage what Peter generates without being destroyed by it. Whether this was Carter's deliberate plan or the intelligence program's arrangement, or simply the universe's, Stewie's, structural design, the result is the same. Lois is exactly right for the specific function the Griffin household requires. Too exactly right for coincidence. There is a moment in the show where Lois's mask genuinely slips, where the patience and the competence and the suburban stability crack, and what comes through is not a tired suburban mother, but something older and harder and more capable of real darkness. These moments are brief. The show is uncomfortable with them, or rather, it deploys them for effect and then withdraws, as if the glimpse was enough, as if the full exposure would be too much. But the theorists mark these moments. They collect them. And what they see in the aggregate is a woman who contains significantly more than she shows, who has compartmentalized something, some history, some capability, some dimension of herself, that the daily performance of the good wife and the patient mother does not access. What is it? The theory doesn't fully agree. The possibilities range from the relatively mundane, she was smarter and more ambitious than the life she chose, and the suppression of that ambition is what occasionally surfaces, to the more complex. To the idea that Lois, like several of the show's other characters, has a connection to the institutional background of the world that her public persona doesn't reveal. Carter's daughter, adjacent to the observation program, married to the man the world was built around, mother to the god of the universe. Lois Pewterschmidt Griffin, in this reading, is not a supporting character. She is a pivot point. Everything in the Griffin mythology passes through her. She is the connection between the institutional world and the household world, between the power structure and the story, between the thing that was arranged and the people who live in it. And she does it so quietly, so completely, so utterly without fanfare or acknowledgement. She cleans the kitchen, she plays piano, she forgives things that should not be forgiven and endures things that should not be endured, and loves people who are, by any reasonable measure, very difficult to love. And she does it because she was built for it, because Carter made her, or the program made her, or Stewie designed her, or the universe needed her, or all of the above at once, because some combination of forces that are larger than any single theory arranged for there to be at the center of this family, someone with the specific capacity to hold it together. That is not something you do by accident. That is something you were built for. And built for it or not, she keeps showing up. She always keeps showing up. Bonus Section 3, The Show Within the Show. Brian as Seth MacFarlane. We touched on this theory in the Creator God section, but it deserves its own space, because it is, in some ways, the most personal theory in the whole collection, the one that reaches most directly into the relationship between the creator and the created. Brian Griffin is voiced in Seth MacFarlane's natural speaking voice. He is the only major character for whom this is true. Every other character MacFarlane voices, Peter, Stewie, Quagmire, is performed through an accent, a pitch adjustment, an exaggeration that creates distance between the actor and the role. Brian is just MacFarlane talking. The theory begins here and moves through the character's biography, the failed novelist, the outsider intellectual, the creature of aspiration and disappointment, the one who wants to be taken seriously by the culture that has decided at some basic level that he doesn't quite qualify. MacFarlane, who created one of the most successful animated franchises in television history, who is by any commercial measure an extraordinary success, has described in various contexts a persistent sense of being not quite in the right room, of wanting to be taken seriously in ways that the success of his shows doesn't quite provide, of aspiring to a cultural legitimacy that popular animation, however beloved, tends not to confer. He put that aspiration into Brian. He put the self-doubt there, and the drinking that might accompany it, and the romantic failures that come with someone whose actual self is always slightly obscured by the version he performs. He made a character who is his own honest self-portrait, very thinly, disguised as a dog. And then something interesting happened. As the show evolved, Brian changed. He became, in the later seasons, less sympathetic, more self-important, more capable of casual selfishness, more willing to do the thing that served him at the cost of the people around him. The fan community read this as a decline in writing quality. Brian used to be good. Now the writers make him difficult because they don't know what to do with him, but the theory reads it differently. The theory reads it as autobiography, as what happens when the self-portrait is maintained across decades of a changing life. McFarlane's relationship with his own ambitions, his own relationship with what he has built and what he is and what he wanted to be, has shifted over the years in ways that the character reflects. The Brian of Season 3 and the Brian of Season 16 are both honest. They are honest about different years. And the Brian who died in Season 12, who died and was brought back, was, on this reading, a moment where the author looked at his own self-portrait and briefly let it end. Let the version of himself he'd been carrying through the show reach a conclusion. Let the character who was him in some displaced way be done. And then changed his mind. Or had it changed for him. Stewie came back and saved Brian, and the show went on, and the self-portrait continued. Because the story wasn't finished. There is one more element of the Brian as McFarlane theory that is worth dwelling on. If Brian is the author's self-portrait, then his relationship with Stewie is a portrait of a relationship that the author either has or wishes he had. A relationship with someone who sees you entirely, who knows the performance and the reality underneath the performance, and chooses to be there anyway. Who will, when the story tries to end, go back and make sure it doesn't. This is the fantasy at the center of the creator-God theory, stated from the human side rather than the divine one. Not what it means to be the God, but what it means to be the God's friend. What it means to be the one who was built, not randomly, but specifically, to be with someone who needed you. The dog and the baby, the writer and the God, the self-portrait and its creator. Driving across the country, sitting at the bar, talking about books, watching the seasons pass on a street that neither of them fully believes is real. But being there anyway. Being there because the alternative, even for a God, even for a writer, even for an engineered consciousness in a dog's body, is being nowhere at all. And nowhere is the one thing neither of them can survive. Extended section, loose threads, dropped clues, and the theories that live in the margins. Before we close this long conversation, let's gather some of the threads we haven't fully followed. The ones that live in the margins of the mythology, that are too small to be their own sections but too persistent to be dismissed. Stan Thompson and the biology of Meg. Stan Thompson appears in one episode to establish that he is Meg's biological father. He is then essentially absent from the story. The theories about what this absence means range from the structural, that his function was served by the establishment and the story had nothing more for him to do, to the conspiratorial. The conspiratorial version notes that a man who fathered a child with Lois Schmidt and then simply disappeared from her life and from the story's accounting of itself is a man who had reasons for the disappearance, reasons he had helped maintaining. Stan Thompson as another ghost in the institutional background. Another person whose relationship with the Griffin family is a piece of a larger pattern that the show doesn't fully illuminate. The theory doesn't tell us what Stan Thompson knows or why he stayed away, but it insists that a man whose DNA produced the family's lightning rod, who walked away without a backward glance and was never seen again, was not simply an irresponsible partner. He was something with a function that the story completed and then set aside. What that function was, the theory leaves open. Some doors are better left ajar. Dylan Flanagan and the question of Peter's legacy. Peter has a son from a previous relationship, Dylan, who appears in a Season 6 episode and is then not heard from again. Dylan is, by the episode's account, the better version of Peter. The version with the same raw material but better circumstances, better outcomes, more of the potential realized. The theory: Dylan's disappearance is not narrative neglect but structural necessity. A better version of Peter existing in the show's world is incompatible with the world's design. The world was built around a specific Peter, the one who needs the heightened reality, the one who requires the forgiving resets, the one who is maintained by the system at exactly this level of dysfunction. A better version challenges the premise of everything, so the story sets him aside. Because the world was not built for Dylan, it was built for his father. And the world is, in the end, loyal to what it was built for. Even when a better version is standing right there offering a different possibility, even when the better version is real and present and visible. The structure holds. The design persists. Peter remains Peter, and Dylan goes back to wherever stories go when the main narrative is done with them. The zip code. The fictional town in which the show is set has been assigned, in various pieces of merchandise and production material, the zip code 00093. This zip code does not exist in the United States Postal Service's numbering system. The theorists love this detail with a particular intensity, because it is the kind of detail that could easily have been assigned accurately. Any real Rhode Island zip code would have served the same function, and wasn't. The town is not on the postal map. It is not in the official geography. It occupies physical space on the Rhode Island coast without being accessible by the normal systems of navigation and our address. You can't send a letter to Spooner Street. Not a real one. Not one that would arrive. The street exists outside the grid, like it was put there by someone who wanted it off the official map. Like it was, from the beginning, designed to be invisible to the normal systems of record. A neighborhood in a zip code that doesn't exist, full of people the government knows about but doesn't officially acknowledge, built around a family that the universe itself was constructed to contain. Nowhere, officially, but very much somewhere in every way that matters. The chicken returns. One last thread, one last detail that the theorists have not let go. Every time Ernie the Giant Chicken returns, the fight is different. The locations change. The duration changes. The damage changes. But one thing is always the same. Neither of them dies. They hurt each other. Badly sometimes. In ways that should be permanent. And then they go back to their lives until the next time. The theory, the quietest and in some ways the most interesting theory about this running bit, is that Peter and the chicken need each other. That the intrusion from outside the world and the defender of the world inside it are not simply enemies. They are, in a strange and specific way, necessary to each other. Because without the external force pushing in, the world would have no edge, no boundary, no definition. A world with no outside pressing against it is a world with no sense of its own shape. And without the defender inside, the external force would have no resistance. No reason to keep coming back. No reason to be anything more than an intrusion that dissolves into the world it entered. They fight because they are what defines each other. The inside and the outside meeting in the middle over and over, making the boundary visible by pressing against it, making the world real by refusing to let it be anything else. And Peter, enormous and loud and wildly imprecise about almost everything, swings his fist at the thing from outside. And the world holds. And that's where we'll end tonight. The Griffin family on their street in a town that isn't on any map, in a world someone made for them, still setting the table, still showing up, still fighting the things that come in from outside, still sitting together on the couch in the warm yellow light of a kitchen that smells like dinner, while a baby upstairs tinkers with something that probably shouldn't exist, and a dog on the couch reads a book he's probably read before, and the television fills the room with the familiar sound of a world that keeps going. We've been all the way through it tonight. The creator god and the CIA experiment and the grief world and the lightning rod and the parallel families and the waiting room and the simulation and the process manager of death. We followed every thread we could find, and at the bottom of all of it, underneath every theory, beneath every conspiracy, at the foundation of every strange and beautiful reading that fans have built over 25 years of watching and loving and wondering, is the same thing. A family that keeps choosing to be a family, even when it's hard, even when it resets, even when the world around them is clearly impossible by any reasonable standard, even knowing what we know now about who built it and why and what it costs the people inside it. They keep coming back to the table. And maybe that's the answer to all of it. Maybe that's what the whole long, strange story was always trying to say. That love doesn't require a real universe. It just requires the people inside it to keep showing up. Keep showing up. And they do. They always do. Thank you for being here tonight. If this found you somewhere good, if you drifted somewhere soft and warm while we walked through all of it, please drop a comment and tell me what theory stayed with you most. The one that opened something up. The one you're still sitting with in the dark. If you want more nights like this, subscribe. There are more theories, more shows, more long, slow walks through the things we love and the strange questions they leave behind. There's always another thread to pull. Sleep well. We'll be here. End of script. Uncle Guy lore. Fall asleep to every Family Guy. Conspiracy Section 13. The Long Shadow of Seth. How a creator's distance changes a world. There is a particular phenomenon in the life of long-running creative works that is hard to name precisely but easy to feel. It is what happens when the person who dreamed the thing into being stops dreaming it actively. When the daily attention, the granular, loving, stubborn insistence on getting it right, is withdrawn gradually or all at once, and other hands carry the work forward. The hands that follow are not bad hands. They may be exceptionally talented hands. They know the world that was built. They know the characters, the rhythms, the specific grammar of the universe they're maintaining. They can produce episodes, and many of those episodes will be funny and sharp and worth your time. But something is different. Something has left the room. And the fan community, watching from outside, can feel the absence, even when they can't name it precisely. They say the show used to feel different. It used to feel like it meant something to the people making it. It used to feel like someone was steering with intention rather than maintaining with competence. This is the theory of Seth MacFarlane's distance, and it is not a criticism of MacFarlane as a person. It is an observation about what happens to any creative work when the original dreamer steps back. The show continues. The world persists. But the specific quality of a thing made by someone who needs to make it, who cannot not make it, who is working something out with the work, that quality is not transferable. It lives in the original relationship between the maker and the made. MacFarlane's stepping back from active creative oversight of Family Guy around 2011 is documented. He continued to voice the characters. He continued to be associated with the show in all the ways that matter commercially. But the daily steering, the decisions about which direction the characters should go, which stories should be told, which jokes push the thing forward, and which ones just filled time, those decisions passed to other people. The showrunners who followed, Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin, who had both been with the show for years and knew it deeply, were not inadequate. The show they ran produced episodes that were sometimes excellent and consistently watchable. But they were maintaining. They were stewards. And stewards, however dedicated, are different from originators. What does stewardship look like from the inside of a fictional universe? The theorists have a specific answer. It looks like the world slowly losing faith in its own center. In the early seasons, the show believed in Peter. Not literally, us. No one thinks animated characters have a metaphysical status, but structurally. The world was arranged around him in a way that said, this matters. This man, these people, this street, these relationships, they are worth caring about. The chaos they generated had stakes because the show had convinced you to invest in the people generating it. As the seasons progressed, the investment declined. Not entirely. There are episodes scattered throughout the later run that recapture it. But the aggregate trend is toward less belief, toward a show that is going through the motions of caring rather than actually caring. This is the footprint of stewardship without origination. The stewards know the moves. They can execute the sequences. But the belief that animated the original moves, the belief that this is the story worth telling, these are the people worth spending time with. This is the thing the world needs to exist. That belief is harder to maintain when it isn't yours originally, and the characters feel it. Not within the fiction. They don't know the show is being made, but the audience does. The audience always knows when a story is being told because it needs to be told versus because it can be told. One needs, the other allows, and the difference between them is everything. There is a specific character arc that illustrates this distinction with painful clarity, and it is Brian Griffin's. Brian in the early seasons is a character being written by someone who loves him in the particular way you love a self-portrait, with the generous cruelty of a writer who knows their character's weaknesses because those weaknesses are also their own, who makes him fail in ways that are real and specific and recognizable because the writer has felt those failures from the inside. Brian in the later seasons is a character being written by people who know who he is but don't feel what he feels. Who can execute his cynicism and his pretension and his romantic disasters All the notes are right, but who play them without the underneath? Without the thing that made his failures hurt rather than just annoy. The fan community's gradually intensifying hostility toward Brian in the later seasons is, on this reading, a reaction to a specific change. He stopped being someone you recognized and became someone you observed. He stopped being a portrait and became a description. And a description of a person is not the same as a person, not even close. Let's talk about what the show might have looked like if McFarlane had stayed active, if the original creative driver had remained at the wheel through all 25 seasons. This is, of course, speculation. Pure speculation, undisguised. But it is the kind of speculation that illuminates the original by contrast. An actively McFarlane-stewarded later show would, the theories suggest, have pushed Stewie further rather than safer. The evil genius mythology would have been complicated rather than retired, given depth and history and an actual arc, rather than simply being turned off and replaced with a softer substitute. The show would have continued asking, what is this being? What does it mean to be ancient and trapped and brilliant in a world too small for you? And it would have continued finding new and surprising answers because the original sensibility that created Stewie was one that thrived on complicating its own premises. An actively McFarlane-stewarded later show might have done something genuinely surprising with Peter, might have pushed his decline toward an actual reckoning, rather than just an ongoing escalation without consequence. The grief world theory, in a show more willing to engage with its own emotional truth, might have had an episode that came close to the surface. Not resolved it, the show doesn't do that, and shouldn't, but acknowledged it. Let Peter look, for a moment, at what is underneath the comedy. And Meg. In a show that still had its original belief in what it was doing, Meg's lightning rod function would not have been something played for repeated cruelty. It would have been something explored. The show would have asked, what does it cost a person to absorb this much? What does she carry that no one else can see? What happens if one day she sets it down? These are questions that a show in love with its own world asks about the people inside it. They are questions the later seasons mostly stopped asking. But here is where the theory takes its most interesting turn. Because if the show declining is partly a story of McFarlane's distance, of the originator stepping back from the thing he originated, then the show's continued existence is a story of something else. Something that doesn't quite have a name. The show has outlasted the active creative engagement of its maker. It has continued for years in the care of people who love it, but didn't make it, telling stories that are sometimes good and sometimes not, in a world that was originally built with enormous intentionality and is now being maintained with enormous professionalism. And the fans still watch? Some of them. Fewer than before, but still some. They still write theories, they still pull threads, they still find things in the world that its current caretakers may not have put there intentionally. Resonances and patterns and meanings that live in the structure of the original creation, and persist regardless of what the subsequent seasons have done with them. The world Stewie made is still there, underneath everything. The bones of the original design are still visible if you know where to look. And people keep looking because the original was worth looking at, and the bones don't go away just because the flesh has changed. That is perhaps the final theory, not about the characters inside the show, but about the show itself. The theory that the mythology survives its own decline, that the world built with love retains the shape of that love, even after the love has moved on to other projects. That Spooner Street is still, underneath everything, the place someone wanted it to be, and that is enough on some nights to keep going back. Section 14. Chris Griffin and the Boy. Nobody theorized. This section is about the gap. There are 4 Griffin children. Meg gets more theoretical attention than almost any other character in the show. Stewie gets more than any other character in animation history. Even Chris, large, awkward, unexpectedly artistic, perpetually underestimated, gets occasional treatment. But Chris Griffin is notable in the fan theory community primarily for being the one who doesn't get theorized. And the reason he doesn't get theorized is itself a theory. The theory is this: Chris Griffin is exactly what he appears to be. He is a teenage boy who is not especially smart, not especially motivated, not especially burdened by secret depths. He likes to draw. He is kind in a way that is easy to overlook because it isn't loud. He gets along with his siblings in the imperfect, occasionally careless way that actual siblings do. He is embarrassed by his parents and loyal to them, and confused by the world and basically, essentially, fine. He is in a show full of characters who are hiding something enormous underneath their surface, a person whose surface is the whole thing. And the theorists pass him by because there is nothing underneath to theorize about. Which is interesting because in a world as deliberately constructed as Spooner Street, a world that has Stewie and Brian and Meg and Peter, all of whom are, on the evidence, carrying freight that their visible selves don't show, a character with no freight is conspicuous. Conspicuous in its own way. Why would Stewie, designing the family he was born into, include a sibling with no hidden function? Why would the observation program, which seems to have positioned everyone else on the street with some purpose in mind, leave one Griffin child simply normal? The answer the theory offers is kind and quiet, because every constructed world needs a place that is just what it is. Every system, full of complexity and hidden meaning, needs one element that is simply itself, unencoded, unobserved, just there. Chris is the control. He is the thing against which all the strangeness of the rest of the family can be measured. He is the signal that all the others are carrying something unusual because he is carrying nothing unusual at all. He is the ordinary one, in a family where ordinary is the rarest thing. And he is loved, in the show, in the quiet, undemonstrative way that ordinary things are loved. Not with the dramatic, crisis-tested love that Stewie's mythology requires, not with the complicated, grief-soaked love that Meg's position produces, but with the simple, ongoing warmth that you feel for someone who is just here, just present, just themselves. In a show about complicated people in an impossible world, Chris Griffin is an act of mercy. One person who gets to just be a person. One corner of the house that doesn't have a secret. Let's go further with this thought because it connects to something that the theories rarely address directly, what it costs the family to be so extraordinary. Peter is carrying the weight of a world he may have built inside his own mind to survive something unsurvivable. Lois is managing the impossible daily logistics of a household that should collapse but doesn't, while also managing whatever she is underneath the management. Meg is absorbing the family's darkness as a structural function. Stewie is a god performing a child. Brian is an experiment performing a dog. That is an enormous collective weight. That is a household full of people who are every single day doing something that takes everything they have. Chris gets to just live there. He gets to come down for breakfast without an agenda. He gets to watch television without it being a metaphor. He gets to have a normal teenage day, embarrassing, slightly boring, occasionally funny, without carrying the full freight of the mythology. And the mercy of that, in a world this loaded, is real. It is a real act of mercy that the world contains, somewhere in the middle of all the theory and the grief and the conspiracy and the divine architecture. One person who doesn't have to be more than himself. One person for whom it is enough to just be here. It is a real act of mercy. And maybe it tells us something about the person who designed this world, about what he wanted it to contain alongside all the complexity. That he left room for Chris. He left room for ordinary. He left room for just here. Section 15. The recurring crises and the shape of what the show repeats. Every long-running story has its grammar, its recurring structures, its favorite shapes. The plots that come back in different costumes. The dynamics that reset and repeat. The specific kinds of crisis that the story returns to again and again across its run. Family Guy has a grammar. And the theorists who have studied it most carefully have identified a handful of recurring structures that appear with enough regularity that they must, on some level, mean something. Must be doing something more than filling time. The first recurring structure is the Peter goes too far and the family forgives him arc. This is the most common plot shape in the show's entire run. Peter does something that damages the family, sometimes slightly, sometimes catastrophically. The family responds with appropriate upset. Peter either learns his lesson or is distracted from it. The episode ends with some version of restoration. Everyone is roughly where they were before. This arc, repeated hundreds of times across 25 seasons, is easy to read as lazy writing. as a formula the show defaulted to because it was reliable. But the purgatory theory has a different reading. This is the lesson Peter is in the loop to learn. The same test administered over and over in slightly different forms. The question, will you choose this time the people over the impulse, the family over the chaos, the love over the selfishness? He mostly doesn't. Not permanently. Not in ways that stick. But occasionally, in the episodes that the fan community identifies as the best of the later seasons, he does. Something breaks through. Something real surfaces. And for one episode, Peter Griffin chooses right. And then the reset comes, and the test is offered again. Because the learning hasn't been completed, because choosing right once isn't the work. The work is choosing right when it's hard, when you don't feel like it. When the impulse is strong and the consequence seems manageable and you do it anyway because of who you are trying to become rather than who you feel like being in the moment. That is the work. And Peter is still doing it. The second recurring structure is the Brian reaches for something and misses arc. Brian writes. Brian pursues a woman. Brian publishes something. Brian tries to be taken seriously in some arena that matters to him, and he misses. Not completely, not always, but enough that the effort costs him more than the achievement provides. This arc repeats with such regularity that it is tempting to read it as punishment, as the show being cruel to a character the writers have decided to diminish. But the more compassionate reading, the one that takes seriously the idea of Brian as both self-portrait and experiment, sees something different. Brian keeps reaching. Despite every miss, every failure, every humiliation large and small, he keeps reaching. He keeps writing. He keeps sending things out. He keeps falling for people he knows are wrong for him because the alternative to trying is accepting that there is nothing left to try for, and Brian cannot accept that. That refusal, the refusal to stop reaching, even in the face of all the evidence that the reaching will cost him, is the most human thing about him, the most real thing. The thing that the CIA experiment theory and the dog as vessel theory and all the other frameworks can't fully account for. He keeps reaching. In 25 seasons of television across all the arcs and the failures and the character shifts and the death and the return, Brian Griffin keeps reaching. That's not nothing. In a world that keeps resetting, in a life that keeps costing him more than it gives, the reaching is the thing that stays. The third recurring structure is the Meg disappears and nobody notices arc. This is the darkest of the three, and it appears less often. The show uses it sparingly, perhaps because even the show, which has a complicated relationship with Meg's welfare, recognizes that some things can only be said so many times before they stop being a story device and become just a fact. The structure. Something happens to Meg. The family is not aware, or is aware and doesn't respond, or responds and then forgets. The episode ends without Meg's experience having been fully acknowledged by the people who should have acknowledged it. Over 25 seasons, this structure has been repeated in dozens of variations. And each repetition is, on the purgatory reading, another instance of the lesson the family hasn't learned yet. Another opportunity, missed, to see Meg. To acknowledge the lightning rod. To say, this is not just a function, this is a person. And the person is here and has been here and deserves to be seen. The show has in later seasons begun to move toward this acknowledgement. Not consistently, not irreversibly, but more often than it used to. The writing has started, in the episodes that care, to treat Meg as someone rather than something. That is, on the purgatory reading, progress, real progress, slow and imperfect and frequently reversed, but real. The lesson is being learned. Very slowly, across decades of television, but being learned. Section 16. The Town Without a History. What Rhode Island means and doesn't mean. The show is set in Rhode Island. This is specific, deliberate, and consistent across every season and spin-off and piece of supplementary material. Seth MacFarlane went to the Rhode Island School of Design. The setting is, in the most literal sense, autobiographical geography. The place where the creator spent formative years translated into animation and populated with fictional people. But Rhode Island, as a setting, does more than just acknowledge MacFarlane's biography. It does something structural. It places the story in the smallest state in the country, the most contained, the one that is, by pure geography, most enclosed by its own borders, most clearly defined, most aware of its own edges. The theorists who have thought about this are interested in what it means to set a story about an inescapable world in America's most bordered state, in a place where the edges are always close, where you are always, at most, a short drive from the coast. From the physical limit of the land, the purgatory theory is enhanced by this setting. You cannot leave Rhode Island without knowing you've left. The state is small enough that the boundaries are felt, and Spooner Street, with its impossible zip code and its unverifiable geography, sits inside that already enclosed space and makes it smaller still. A neighborhood within a state that is already nearly a neighborhood. A world within a world within a world. The layers of containment are deliberate, whether or not the show consciously intended them. McFarlane, who spent years in Rhode Island and brought that specific geography back with him, put his characters in the most contained American state he knew. And then he put them on a street that doesn't officially exist within it. The containment is complete. The loop is closed. There is nowhere to go that isn't still here. There is a secondary element of the Rhode Island setting that the theories have explored less, but which is worth noting. Rhode Island is a state with a complex and specific history of religious tolerance. It was founded in the 17th century as a place where people of different religious beliefs could coexist. A radical idea for its time, and one that gives the state a particular relationship with the idea of community despite difference. A family like the Griffins, dysfunctional, contradictory, occasionally monstrous to each other, but ultimately impossible to separate, is perhaps a natural inhabitant of a state that was built on the idea that people who shouldn't get along can be made to coexist. Not by erasing their differences, not by forcing agreement, but by simply insisting on the shared space. This is what Spooner Street is: shared space. Uncomfortable, imperfect, occasionally explosive shared space. A place where a god and an experiment and a scapegoat and a grief-constructed father and a woman with hidden depths and a boy who is just himself somehow manage to live at the same address. The state chose tolerance as its founding principle. The street chose proximity, and somehow, out of those two things, something that looks almost like a family. Section 17. What the show gets right about being a family. We've spent a long time now talking about what the show is underneath its surface. The theories, the conspiracies, the hidden architectures. But before we close, I want to spend some time with what the show gets right on the surface. With the things it understands about families that are not theories at all, but observations so accurate they cut through the comedy and the cartoon physics and sit there, plain and true. Because Family Guy, for all its excesses and its cruelties and its years of difficult creative choices, does understand some things about the experience of living with people who are yours. It understands the particular exhaustion of loving someone difficult, the specific kind of tired that accumulates from years of the same arguments, the same failures, the same promises half kept, the same morning after the same night. Lois carries this tired in her posture, in the quality of her sighs, in the way she keeps showing up even when showing up requires everything she has. It understands the way that children become adults inside families that were built before they arrived. The way Meg and Chris and Stewie, despite their vast differences, despite being almost nothing alike, share the specific experience of having been born into a world they didn't choose, organized around dynamics they inherited, carrying the weight of a history that was already in progress when they got there. It understands the way that friendship operates between men who have very little in common except proximity and time. Peter and Joe and Quagmire and Cleveland are not natural friends in any theoretical sense. They don't match. They don't agree on much. They irritate each other regularly and fail each other occasionally, and have, over the course of the show's run, done things to each other that actual friends would not survive. And yet they keep going to the bar together. They keep sitting at the same table. They keep somehow being the group. Because proximity and time compounded across decades produce something that looks enough like loyalty that it functions as loyalty even when it isn't quite. The show understands the way that love is often not the thing you feel in the moment, but the pattern you make over time. The thing you see only in retrospect in the shape of all the small returning, all the small choosing, all the small not leaving. Peter comes home. Every time. He comes home. That is not nothing. That might be everything. There is one final thing the show understands that I want to name before we end. It understands that the people we love most are often, in specific and maddening ways, impossible. That the people we chose and the people we were given are frequently the same people who cost us the most, who require the most of us, who are most capable of making us feel whatever feeling is the sharpest and most persistent and hardest to name. Not just love, not just frustration, something more complex than either. Something that only exists in long-term proximity, in the years of learning someone well enough to know exactly how they'll disappoint you, and choosing to be disappointed again anyway because the alternative is not knowing them. The Griffins are impossible people, and the theories we've spent tonight building, the God and the experiment, and the lightning rod and the grief world and the purgatory and the simulation, all of them, at their best, are trying to explain why impossible people keep coming back to each other. Keep setting a table for people who don't deserve it. Keep choosing, in the most improbable circumstances, the thing that holds. Maybe they don't need a theory. Maybe the show has been saying it plainly in every episode for 25 years. They love each other, even when it's terrible, even when it costs them, even when the world they're doing it in is a simulation or a dream or a loop or a construction or a grief fantasy or just a cartoon. They love each other. And that is, in the end, the only theory that matters. The only one that was ever really there. Let your breathing slow a little more now. Let the last of the tension ease out of wherever it gathered during our long walk through all of this. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've been to some strange and some beautiful places. The universe made by a baby who wanted to be surprised. The dog who keeps writing a novel no one will read. The man who might be dreaming his family alive every day because the alternative is too dark to live inside. The girl who holds the lightning so the house doesn't burn. The neighbors who are watching and watching over. The death that can be sprained. The simulation that keeps rerunning until it gets it right. The God who built a world. And the writer who put himself inside it. All of it living on one street. All of it happening at that same table. All of them, impossibly, still there. Still home. Thank you for spending tonight here with me. This was a long one, a real long one, and I'm grateful you stayed through all of it. If one of these theories landed in you somewhere, if something opened up while we were walking through it, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me which one. Tell me where you were listening from. Tell me if it kept you awake or if it helped you drift. Subscribe if you want more of this. More long nights, more theories. More slow walks through the worlds that live inside the things we love. There is always more to find. There is always another door left slightly open. Sleep well. End of script. Uncle Guy lore, fall asleep to every Family Guy conspiracy. Total runtime target, approximately 2 hours 30 minutes. Section 18, the road to episodes. Freedom, friendship, and the world beyond the street. There are a handful of episodes across the show's long run that exist in a different register from everything else. Episodes that the fan community returns to not because they are the funniest or the most outrageous, but because they feel different, more alive, more honest, more like something that was made by someone who needed to make it rather than someone who was scheduled to produce it. The road to episodes are the clearest example of this phenomenon. The road to format, which the show has returned to more than a dozen times across its run, follows Brian and Stewie on an adventure together, removed from the Griffin's household, from Spooner Street, from the normal structure of the show's weekly life. The two of them travel, they argue, they face something unexpected, and in the process of navigating it together, they reveal more of themselves than they ever reveal in any other context. These episodes are beloved by the fan community in a way that transcends the show's ordinary appeal. People who have grown frustrated with Family Guy in general will still speak warmly about the road to episodes. They are, in almost universal critical assessment, the best the show has to offer. The theorists have a specific explanation for why this is. In the road to episodes, Stewie and Brian are operating outside the constructed world. They are traveling with Guy through time, through dimensions, through other countries and other realities. They are, in a meaningful sense, beyond the edges of the simulation, beyond the zip code that doesn't exist, beyond the street that no one can leave. And what happens to them there, outside the world that was built to contain them, tells us something that no episode set on Spooner Street can quite manage. It tells us who they are when the container is removed. What Stewie is outside the container is still extraordinary. His intelligence, his time travel capabilities, his capacity for swift strategic thinking in the face of the unexpected, all of this travels with him. He is still the god of the universe on the road. He still has the tools. He still has the power. But outside the container, the performance relaxes. The evil genius act, which even within the show has been established as something he puts on rather than something he is, loosens. He is less likely to monologue, more likely to express what he actually feels. More likely to need Brian in ways he won't admit to on the street. The road is where Stewie allows himself to be vulnerable, and the theorists find this significant. If Stewie designed Spooner Street as a place where he could learn to be small, to be limited, to experience the ordinary life that omnipotence has always denied him, then the road to episodes are the moments when he's getting the most out of the experiment, when the design is working, when the creator is actually being surprised, actually being moved, actually experiencing something he could not have engineered from outside. And what moves him every time is Brian. Not the cleverness of the adventure, not the strangeness of the places they visit. Brian, the specific, irreplaceable, designed to be right for him companion, who is wrong for the human world and right for this one, who argues with him and challenges him and falls asleep on him during long journeys, and is sometimes infuriating and always, always there. The road to episodes are the show at its most honest about what Stewie is actually looking for. They strip away the household, the parents, the siblings, the performing. And what they reveal at the center of all of it is this: a being who made everything in search of one thing he couldn't make. Company. What Brian is outside the container is freer than he ever is on the street. On Spooner Street, Brian is always in some kind of performance. The sophisticated dog, the failed writer maintaining the dignity of his ambitions in the face of a household that doesn't take them seriously. The one who is slightly too good for the room, slightly above it all, maintaining a distance that functions as protection. On the road, the protection becomes less necessary. Because on the road, Brian is not a pet. He is not a family member of ambiguous status. He is a traveler with a companion, and the companion sees him without the hierarchy. Stewie doesn't see a dog. Stewie sees Brian, the consciousness, the person, the specific and irreplaceable entity that the universe contains only one of. Being seen like that changes a person. It changes what they're willing to admit, what they're willing to ask for, what they're willing to feel. The road to episodes contains some of the most emotionally candid moments in the show's entire run. Moments where Brian says things he wouldn't say at home. Where the guard drops and what's underneath it is not the pretension or the self-importance or the romantic recklessness that has become his narrative in the later household episodes. What's underneath it is someone who is grateful, someone who is against all the expectations of his own self-mythologizing, genuinely happy. Happy to be here, happy to be with this particular being, happy to be in whatever wild and improbable place the road has brought them to, as long as the other person is there. The road to episodes are the show's purest argument for the value of being seen, for the specific and irreplaceable relief of having one person in the world who knows what you are and is here anyway. And they return to this argument again and again across the seasons in different places and different circumstances, because it is an argument that bears repeating, because it is an argument that is always true. Section 19. What happens to the people who leave? Cleveland, Quagmire, and the edges of the world. People leave Spooner Street, not often, not permanently usually, but they do leave. Characters who have been part of the mythology depart, some briefly, some for extended periods. And the show continues without them, and then sometimes they come back and sometimes they don't. The theorists are interested in what leaving means. In a world that has been established as a loop, as a purgatorial process, as a simulation, what does it mean when someone exits? Cleveland Brown left. He went to Virginia to start a new chapter, to be in his own story, to move through his own adventures. His spin-off ran for 4 seasons, and then he returned to Spooner Street quietly, without dramatic re-entry. On the Purgatory reading, this departure and return is significant. Cleveland left before his work was complete. The spin-off, his time away, his new life, was not a conclusion. It was a detour. The thing he needed to learn or do or face was not available in Virginia. Or it was available there, but it wasn't finished there. And so the loop brought him back. Not forcibly, not against his will. The loop doesn't work that way, but structurally, inevitably, because the work was not done. He came back. Because Spooner Street holds the work. Quagmire has never left, and the theorists find this telling. In a cast of characters who drift away and return, who have their own spin-offs and their own stories, Quagmire stays. He is always on the street. He is always in the group. He is always at the bar, at the table, present, and observant, and performing his performance. The theory says, Quagmire cannot leave. His function, whatever the observation program or the universe designed him for, requires his physical proximity to the Griffins. He is not trapped in any painful sense. He is stationed. He is the watcher who cannot leave the post. And the decades of that staying, the years and years of being the one who doesn't go anywhere, the one who is always here when others have come and gone, have given Quagmire a density that the show's other characters lack. He has accumulated more time in this world than almost anyone else. More observations, more understanding of the specific patterns of this specific street. He knows this place better than anyone, maybe better than the god who designed it. There is one more departure worth discussing because it is the most structurally significant one in the mythology. Brian died. Not metaphorically, not in a way that was immediately reversed. For several weeks of real-world time, several episodes of aired television, Brian Griffin was dead. The family mourned. A new dog was brought in. The show went forward without him. And then Stewie went back. We've discussed this before, but what we haven't fully addressed is what the temporary successful departure of Brian Griffin from the show tells us about the world. It tells us the world can continue without him. It tells us that the simulation does not require Brian to run. The purgatory does not need Brian to process. The grief construction does not collapse when Brian is removed. The world can survive his absence, which means that Stewie's intervention, his refusal to let the absence be permanent, was not necessary for the world. It was necessary for Stewie. He brought Brian back not because the universe needed Brian, but because Stewie needed Brian. And a god who uses his power to meet his own needs, who bends the rules of the system he built for personal reasons rather than cosmic ones, is a god who has become, in some essential way, a person. The decision to go back and save Brian is the most human thing Stewie has ever done. More human than any of the soft emotional moments the later seasons give him. More human than the vulnerabilities and the insecurities and the identity struggles. Because it is not performed. It is not performed for anyone. It is just Stewie alone making the one decision that the universe didn't require him to make, but that he couldn't not make. Choosing his companion over the schedule. Choosing love over efficiency. Choosing the person over the process. That is the most human thing in the world, and it happened in a cartoon. Section 20. The question the show has been asking. Since 1999, we've been at this for a long time now, through 17 main sections, and all the bonus material, and the extended threads and the loose ends. Through the creator god, and the simulation, and the purgatory, and the CIA, and the grief world, and the lightning rod, and everything else. And underneath all of it, there has been one question. One question that every theory, in its own way, has been trying to answer. The question is simple. It is so simple that it might seem unworthy of all this elaborate scaffolding we've built around it. But simple questions are often the deepest ones. Often the ones that most reward the time you spend with them. The question is, why do people stay? Why do the Griffins stay on Spooner Street in a household that is frequently difficult and occasionally terrible? Why does Lois stay with Peter, who is more work than almost any person has the right to ask of a partner? Why does Meg stay with a family that, for years and years of episodes, demonstrated in clear and consistent terms that it did not value her? Why does Brian stay in a body that humiliates him and a world that categorizes him as a pet? Why does Stewie, who built the universe and could arrange any circumstances he wanted, stay in a crib on a street in a fictional town? Why do people stay? The theories all have answers, and the answers are different from each other, and none of them is completely wrong. The purgatory theory says they stay because they can't leave until the work is done and the work is not done. The simulation theory says they stay because the operator, because Stewie, keeps running the program, and as long as he runs it, they stay in it. The creator-God theory says they stay because the God designed the world to hold them, and the God keeps choosing not to let it end. The grief world theory says Peter stays because the alternative to the constructed world is a real one that he cannot survive. The lightning rod theory says Meg stays because she understands her function, and she has decided, perhaps against all reasonable advice, to keep fulfilling it. But underneath all the theories, underneath all the frameworks and the architectures, there is an answer that is not theoretical at all. An answer that the show offers, quietly and repeatedly, in the small moments between the chaos and the comedy. People stay because of the moments, not the big moments, not the crisis resolution arcs or the lesson-learned conclusions, or the dramatic reconciliations that happen in Season 14 and are forgotten by Season 15. Those are important, but they are not the reason. The reason is the small moments. The moment when Peter says something genuinely funny and Lois laughs. The real laugh. The one that escapes before she can decide whether to be annoyed. The moment when Stewie, watching Brian sleep, makes no move to wake him and no move to leave. The moment when Meg, allowed just for once to be someone the show is on the side of, is quietly, completely herself. The moment when the family is just together, not performing, not managing a crisis, not proving something, just sitting in the same room, being the specific collection of impossible people that only they are. Those moments are why people stay. Those moments are why the show has gone on for 25 years. Because the moments are real. Whatever the universe is made of, simulation or grief or purgatory or God's creation or just animated cells on a screen, the moments are real. The laughter is real. The specific texture of this specific family, being exactly who they are together, is real. And real things, even in fictional worlds, are worth staying for. The theories will keep being made. The show will keep going, locked in for more seasons, continuing its long, strange run through the decades. And the fans who love it will keep watching and keep theorizing, and keep finding things in the world that McFarlane built that even he may not have known were there. Because that's what happens when a story means enough. It starts to exceed its own intentions. It starts to contain more than was put into it. The people who love it add themselves to it, pour their observations and their questions, and their 2 a.m. thoughts into it, and the story grows larger than the thing that was originally made. Family Guy is a story that has been made larger by the people who love it. Whatever it was when it started, a clever animated comedy from a young guy with a sharp sense of humor and a laptop full of ideas about talking dogs and evil babies, it has become something more. It has become the thing that fans have made of it over 25 years of attention and devotion, and exactly this kind of late-night wondering. It has become a mythology. Not by accident, by love. By the specific, stubborn, returning kind of love that says, I will stay with this, I will keep looking. I will keep finding things in here that are worth finding. That is the love that built the mythology. That is the love that built Spooner Street. And it is, in the end, the only theory you need. Settle in for the last stretch of the night. Let your breathing go slow and even. Let the weight of your body settle into wherever you are. Let the day's accumulated tensions soften and dissolve. The things you were carrying when you sat down to listen, the things that were pressing on you. Let them ease. You spent tonight inside a story. Inside the questions that live inside a story. And questions held gently in the dark with nowhere to be and no answers required are one of the best things to fall asleep with. Let the theories stay open. Let them continue without you, running in the background, turning over slowly the way unresolved things do when the mind relaxes its grip on them. Let Stewie press his button in the dark. Let Brian write his sentence. Let Meg hold the lightning a little longer. Let the family sit down to dinner. Let the door stay open just a little. And sleep. You've done good work tonight just by being here and wondering. That's enough. That is more than enough. This has been Uncle Guy Lore. Subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one. End of script. Uncle Guy Lore, fall asleep to every Family Guy conspiracy. Estimated runtime, approximately 2.5 to 3 hours at standard narration pace, total word count. Target, 30,000 plus appendix, a final walk down Spooner Street, the details that don't add up and the ones that do. Before the night is entirely done, let's do one last thing together. Let's walk down Spooner Street slowly, not looking for the big theories now. We've covered those. But looking for the smaller things, the details that don't quite add up, the corners that catch the light differently than they should, the moments that are easy to dismiss as continuity errors or production oversights, but that once you've spent a night in this mythology start to look like something else entirely. The show's relationship with time is one of the strangest things about it, and the theorists have documented it in extraordinary detail. Characters age inconsistently. Meg was said to be 17 in the early seasons and is still 17 in the later ones. Chris has aged slightly more than his sister. Stewie remains perpetually around 1 year old, and the show has made enough self-aware jokes about this that it clearly knows what it's doing. But the jokes it makes are the show acknowledging the inconsistency without resolving it. Because the inconsistency cannot be resolved within the fiction without collapsing the fiction. Why does time work differently for different characters? The simulation theory has the cleanest answer, because the simulation operator, Stewie, has chosen to advance time selectively. Characters who are essential to the ongoing project age at the rate the project requires. Characters who are not essential or who are protected from the consequences of aging for structural reasons are held more or less fixed. Stewie is held at infancy because aging would destroy the premise of the experiment. Meg is held at 17 because her function, the lightning rod, the designated absorber, is most effectively performed at the age of maximum social vulnerability. A 25-year-old Meg could leave the household, could establish distance, could, in theory, choose a different life. The 17-year-old Meg is still legally and socially dependent on the family, still embedded in the structure, still in position. The age is not accidental. The age is held deliberately. The show's geography also rewards attention. Spooner Street is, when the show bothers to be precise about it, a cul-de-sac, a dead end. The kind of street where the road curves back on itself and deposits you where you started. The theorists have noted this detail with particular interest given the purgatory and loop frameworks we've been working with. A cul-de-sac is a street from which there is only one exit, and the exit returns you to the road you came from. You cannot pass through a cul-de-sac. You can only arrive and return. This is, symbolically, the shape of every episode. Characters leave the street, go into the world, have experiences that seem like they might change things, and return to the same positions they left. The cul-de-sac contains them. Its architecture repeats their story's architecture. The street is the loop made physical. The street is the story told in geography. There is one more detail, the smallest in some ways, but one that the theorists return to more than almost any other. The Griffin house's front door is never locked. In 25 seasons of television across every home invasion and every party and every crisis that should have prompted basic security consciousness, the Griffin house's front door is never locked. People walk in. Unexpected visitors arrive and are received. The inside and the outside are separated by almost nothing. Some theorists read this as the show being lazy about continuity. Houses in animated comedies are permeable spaces by narrative necessity, but others read it differently. They read it as, you can always come in, as the house always being open, always being available, always being a place where there is room for one more person at the table, one more voice in the room, one more mess to navigate together. The door is not locked because the family does not want it locked. Because the family, for all its dysfunction and all its cruelty and all its years of not getting it right, is still a family that leaves the door open. That opens the door. That says you can come in. Come in and sit down. There's room. There is always room. That is, in the end, the detail that matters most. Not the zip code that doesn't exist, or the physics that don't apply, or the ages that don't add up. Not the theories or the conspiracies or the grand architectural explanations for why the world is the way it is. The door left open for whoever needs to come inside. That is Spooner Street. That is what the show has been about underneath everything for all these years. A door left open, a table set, a family waiting, in the only way families know how to wait, by going about the ordinary business of their lives, making noise and making dinner and making mistakes, until the people who are gone come back. And they do come back. They always come back, because the door is always open, and the light is always on.